Chapter 195. Han Yunxi was so immersed in her own fear that she didn't notice the strangeness around her. Long Feiyi, on the other hand, was riding high on his horse like an arrogant king. As for whether he noticed the gazes and discussions around him, no one knew. One horse and two people caused a sensation in the entire city. In a nearby inn, Gu and Mu Ling were sitting by the window. Because Gu Qishao had stolen the Xia clan's treasured medicinal tea tree saplings, the Xia clan had issued a ban on all of Medicine City. It wasn't until today that he escaped with the Mu clan's secret help. He'd hardly sat down when he saw the bustling scene on the streets. Even though Mu Ling only had eyes for Gu, she still couldn't take her eyes off Long Feiyi. "Qi brother, who is that man? He looks very scary." "He's the thief who wants to go to your house," Gu casually replied. Even though he hated Long Feiyi, he wasn't someone who would use hatred to torture himself. He still remembered Long Feiyi's grudge and wasn't angry at all. His attention was completely on Han Yunxi. He noticed that she had lost a lot of weight in just a few days. She looked very tired. Did she and Long Feiyi just return to the city? What did they do together? Did Long Feiyi bring her back to the city on purpose, or was it just an accident? Thinking up to here, Gu's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. Would Long Feiyi do something without a purpose? He wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. However, he couldn't figure out Long Feiyi's intentions. Or could it be that Long Feiyi also had his eyes on Han Yunxi? "Qi brother, just who is he? I don't think he's simple," Mu Ling asked as her gaze followed the people running below. She wanted to see him for a while longer, even if it was just for a little while. This man was frightening at first glance, and even more frightening at second glance. Still, she couldn't help but want to see him for a third time. "Tianning's Duke of Qin," Gu answered carelessly. Unlike Mu Ling, his attention was completely on Han Yunxi. Mu Ling was so shocked by the words "Tianning's Duke of Qin" that she spat out a mouthful of tea. "What did you say?" Gu glanced at the tea on the table in disgust, then continued to look down the stairs. "He's Tianning's Duke of Qin. You, if my father, I promise, will kill you." Mu was so shocked that her face was white. Of course, her shock wasn't because of the Medicine Forest incident. The collusion between the Mu clan and Northern Li's Duke of Kong was an extremely secretive affair. Even Mu Ling didn't know about it, much less the truth behind the theft of the Medicine Forest. As the Mu clan's most talented pharmacist and the one with the most potential to inherit the position of clan head, she never cared for such details. She only knew that Qi brother had suddenly run to find her one day and asked her to help him set up a trap to lure someone to the Mu clan. She'd agreed without a second thought and obtained her father's approval to deploy troops to set up an inescapable net. But she never expected that the person Qi brother wanted to scheme against was Tianning's Duke of Qin. It wasn't that the Mu clan couldn't afford to offend the world's #1 cold duke, but they couldn't offend him so casually. If her father found out about this, wouldn't he lock her up for 8 to 10 days? After Gu rolled his eyes at her, Mu Ling tactfully wiped the tea table clean. Then she asked, "Qi brother, do you have a grudge against the Duke of Qin?" It wasn't clear whether Gu didn't want to pay attention to her, or if he didn't hear her at all. In any case, he just stared outside without reacting. Mu Ling suspiciously followed his gaze and finally realized that Gu was staring at none other than Han Yunxi. Seeing Gu's absent-minded state, the clever Mu Ling more or less understood what was going on. Her clear and melodious voice lowered. "Qi brother, that woman is Qin Wangfei Han Yunxi, right?" But Gu still didn't answer. When he saw Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi walk past the door of the inn, he rose to leave as well. Mu Ling hurriedly followed. Chi brother, where are you going? Gu lovingly stroked her bangs with an enchanting smile. Little Ling, you should go back to the city. Be good. Mu Ling, anxiously grabbed his hand and asked without thinking, she's the one in your heart. This girl was smart, but she couldn't hide her thoughts, especially when it came to Gu. She couldn't hide even half a sentence or half a secret. When she was 10 years old, she snuck into Medicine City's medicine forest to play by herself and bumped into Gu while he was stealing medicine. At that time, Gu was only 13 years old. The two children had a fight and became friends from then on. However, the 13-year-old Gu was no longer a child. His mental age was at least 10 years more mature than other children his age. That encounter wasn't a coincidence either. It was intentional on Gu's part. Of course, Mu Ling didn't know any of this. Since then, Mu Ling had always called this older brother who was prettier than her, Chi brother. She only knew that he was an orphan who grew up eating the bread of hundreds of families. She had never seriously investigated his background. Chi brother had always been carefree, frivolous, and unrestrained. She had never seen him so serious before. But the way he looked at that woman, he was clearly captivated. That night on the roof of the Mu estate, Chi brother said that there was someone in his heart. It must be her. Mu Ling was extremely stubborn. She blinked her big bright eyes and stared at Gu. Unexpectedly, Gu's smile became even brighter. He was very happy. Ling, you're getting smarter and smarter. You guessed right. Mu Ling's bright eyes immediately dimmed at these words. She subconsciously let go of Gu's hand, but she quickly grabbed his arm again. She said in a low voice, "You're shameless. You like a married woman. I'll go tell the Duke of Qin right now." A trace of disdain flashed through Gu's eyes. He suddenly became serious. Really? Mu Ling nodded very seriously. Right away. Gu was amused and laughed heartily. He pinched Mu Ling's rosy cheeks and said with a smile, "Silly girl, you're getting easier and easier to fool. You're so silly." Mu Ling was stunned. Her dim eyes immediately lit up with joy. Chi brother, you're so bad. You lied to me again. Silly girl, how can you be so easy to fool? Ha! Gu Qishao smiled, but before he could finish speaking, he vanished from sight. In hindsight, Mu Linger realized that she hadn't gotten to the bottom of things yet. Was Chi Gij lying to her about having someone in his heart, or was he lying to her about liking Han Yunqi? Chi brother. Mu Ling chased out of the inn. Unfortunately, he had already disappeared. At this moment, Han Yunqi and Long Feiyi had already returned to the Duke of Qin's residence. After a massacre and a few days of rushing, she did not know whether Long Feiyi was tired or not. Anyway, Han Yunqi at this moment was not tired at all. Not because of anything else, but because of the matter of learning concealed weapons. On the way back, she had been thinking about how to explain it, but she still did not know how to explain it when they were already back at the residence. When they arrived at the fork in the garden, one turned left and one turned right. Han Yunqi silently walked behind. When she saw that Long Feiyi was about to turn left, she finally opened her mouth. She did not explain and was very direct. Your Highness, you said that you would teach me concealed weapons if I could come back. Does that still count? Long Feiyi turned around and frowned. It seemed like he wanted to say something, but when he saw Han Yunqi's serious expression, he suddenly felt helpless. He did not know what to do with this woman. If she asked like this, could he say, "Doesn't count"? When has your lordship ever gone back on his words? Long Fei retorted coldly. Han Yunqi realized that her anxious question had actually left Long Feiyi with no room to refuse. How could the dignified Duke of Qin go back on his words? Seeing Long Fei Ye's cold expression, Han Yunqi couldn't help but snort with laughter. Long Fei Ye's face grew even colder as the two of them exchanged glances with tacit understanding. Han Yunqi couldn't help but laugh. Your Highness Duke of Qin's words are worth 9 cauldrons. Starting tomorrow, Qinxia will learn concealed weapons from your Highness. May your Highness not be stingy with your guidance. Long Fei Yi had never liked women's glib tongues, but he didn't seem to reject Han Yunqi. In fact, he felt a sense of helplessness. Of course, he didn't like this feeling very much. I'm not free tomorrow. A few days later, he said coldly before leaving. You just came back and you're busy again. Han Yunqi muttered as she turned right, carrying the heavy bag of concealed weapons back to Leisurely Cloud Pavilion. As expected, Long Fei Yi was very busy. The lights in his quarters hadn't been lit that night, so Grand Concubine Yi couldn't find him to help Zhang Sun Che find a job. In the days they'd been gone, Murong Wanru's wedding was all over. The wedding banquet was over as well. Grand Concubine Yi had done her best for her foster daughter. Although Long Fei Yi wasn't here, she didn't idle around either. She continued to run about finding a job for Zhang Sun Che. Han Yunqi saw all of this and was puzzled. She didn't understand why the lofty Grand Concubine Yi seemed to owe Murong Wanru something. Of course, she didn't think much of it. She was busy researching the needles. First, she had to figure out how to use them, then figure out how to apply poisons and what types of poisons to use. Some poisons were easy to apply because they could be preserved for a long time after sticking the poison onto the weapons. But others needed to be quenched, in other words, put in the poison to refine. Han Yunqi thought to herself, I'm going to be busy in the future. Today, she was trying to apply poison to the needles in the courtyard when a gust of wind suddenly blew by. A red figure flashed by and a sleeve brushed past her cheek like a gentle caress. Who is it? Han Yunqi was alarmed. She sprang to her feet and looked over, only to see a handsome man who looked like the reincarnation of a fox demon. He was dressed in red robes and stood to one side, his long, narrow eyes narrowed as he gave her a harmless smile. Who else could it be but Gu Qishao? Han Yunqi narrowed her eyes as well, her expression dangerous. It's you again. Poison lass, it's not like Big Brother killed your husband. Why do you dislike me so much? Gu asked seriously. Coming uninvited, you're hiding evil intentions. Han Yunqi didn't give him any face. She had no enmity with this fellow, but she'd learned from past mistakes that nothing good would come of him trespassing on the Duke of Qin's estate. Can't I come to see you if I have nothing to do? Gu smiled as he walked over. He took out a pile of things from his wide sleeves. There were ginseng, bird's nest, snow clams, and so on. They were all top-quality tonics. He placed the bags on the stone table. There were quite a lot of them. Han Yunqi was dumbfounded. What are you doing? These are for you to nourish your body. We haven't seen each other for so long. Where have you been? You've lost so much weight. Gu said seriously. Han Yunqi was so shocked that the corner of her mouth twitched. She said, being unaccountably solicitous, you're hiding evil intentions. Gu pretended not to hear her. He glanced at the needles on the table and a complicated look flashed across his eyes. Tang sect's hidden weapons? Han Yunqi then remembered the things on the table. She was about to keep them when Gu held her hand and stopped her. He asked seriously, Poison lass, what's your relationship with the Tang sect? Han Yunqi had never seen such a serious expression on Gu Qishao's face before. She was a little stunned, but it was at this moment that a pebble suddenly flew in from the side and hit Gu Qishao squarely on the back of his hand, sending blood flying into the air. Who was it? Chapter 196. Just how much strength did one need to use a single pebble to leave Gu Qixiao's back a bloody mess? Han Yunxi instinctively turned around and saw that Long Feiyi had appeared out of nowhere. He was dressed in black and stood at the side like a god. His entire body was emitting a terrifying murderous aura, and his cold face was overflowing with anger. Gu's long and narrow eyes narrowed into a straight line. Not only did he not raise his head, he ignored the injury on the back of his hand and grabbed Han Yunxi's hand. Kidnap her. This was Han Yunxi's first thought. Hence, without thinking, she casually grabbed a golden needle from the table and ruthlessly stabbed the back of Gu's hand. Unfortunately, this needle was the one that Han Yunxi had just poisoned. This stab directly pierced the bloody wound on the back of Gu's hand. God knows what poison Han Yunxi had applied. Gu's face turned pale and he immediately let go of his hand. No, to be exact, he did not let go of his own accord, but his hand had lost its strength. Seeing this, Han Yunxi then remembered that this poison was the flesh-corroding powder. It would corrode the flesh in a short period of time. Han Yunxi was frightened. She seemed to have gone overboard. When she raised her head, she saw Gu looking at her deeply. That gaze seemed to never have a smile again. Han Yunxi was stunned. She did not do it on purpose. She did not like this guy, but she would not really make an enemy out of him and hurt him. At this moment, Long Feiyi's figure flashed and closed in. In a flash, Gu turned sideways and hid behind Han Yunxi. He fiercely sent her flying with a palm and pushed Long Feiyi away. He took the opportunity to turn and escape. When Long Feiyi hugged Han Yunxi, Gu had already disappeared. Long Feiyi put down Han Yunxi and immediately chased after her. Han Yunxi squatted down and anxiously shouted, "It hurts. It hurts so much. Men, chase him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse." The Long Feiyi stopped without hesitation. Han Yunxi heaved a sigh of relief when Leng Leng gave the order. Long Feiyi didn't hesitate to stop, but he didn't walk over immediately. Instead, he took one step at a time and glanced at the things on the stone table. His cold eyes suddenly became gloomy. Han Yunxi squatted on the ground and looked at his legs that were slowly approaching her. Her heart was already beating wildly. Gu Qixiao's palm strike had seemed ruthless, but it hadn't hurt her at all. Rather than saying he'd sent her flying, it was more accurate to say he'd sent her straight into Long Fei's arms. Other than being frightened, she was completely fine. She didn't know why she had lied. She only knew that Gu was poisoned, and if he didn't detoxify it in time, the back of his hand would definitely be destroyed. Once Long Feiyi chased after him, Gu would most likely not have time to deal with the flesh-corroding powder. If Long Feiyi didn't chase after him personally, with Gu's ability, he should be able to escape successfully. But, what about her? Looking at Long Feiyi's feet that had stopped in front of her, Han Yunxi's heart almost jumped out of her chest. With Long Feiyi's cold eyes that could see through everything, what could escape him? He should have known about Gu's palm just now, right? And now, she was pretending to be in pain. Could she escape his eyes? Long Feiyi slowly squatted down and asked mildly, "Where does it hurt?" "My head hurts." Han Yunxi didn't dare to look at him. She sincerely hoped that she was injured. It didn't matter if she was seriously injured, then she wouldn't have to pretend anymore. Unfortunately, she didn't have the chance. "My chest hurts." That was just too frightening. She braced herself to reply. "Is that so?" Long Feiyi's tone was very gloomy, making it hard for anyone who heard it to breathe. Han Yunxi's head hung even lower, feeling as though she was about to be executed. She didn't know how to answer him. Suddenly, Long Feiyi lifted her chin up harshly, forcing her to look up and meet his eyes. In an instant, a torrential rage struck Han Yunqi's face like a torrential storm. His icy cold eyes were filled with viciousness as he roared at her, "Answer this duke's question." He could tell at a glance that Gu's slap was to protect this woman and had not hurt her. Moreover, this woman had the guts to face 10 poison humans alone, so how could she possibly be so frightened by the earlier scene to the point of her chest hurting? She was obviously pretending. She was trying to buy time for Gu to escape. Han Yunqi's chin hurt so much that she couldn't speak. Her lack of answers only made Long Feiyi even angrier. "Just what is your relationship with Gu? Did he teach you the poison arts, or did you teach him the antidote arts? Were you in cahoots with him about the violet wormwood incident to lure your lordship to Medicine City?" Long Feiyi asked again and again. He'd never trusted any woman in his life, but this woman was the first. She actually betrayed him. Chu Shifeng and Tang Li had both warned him that this woman wasn't simple, but he insisted on trusting his own eyes. But reality proved him wrong. Zhao Mama hurried over to watch from the side. She was so shocked that she forgot to coax His Highness Duke of Qin to calm him down. After serving him for so long, this was the first time she'd seen him so angry. No matter how big a problem was, he could deal with it coldly, but right now he couldn't control his temper at all. Just what was going on? How many times have you guys snuck in and out? What kind of shady business have you done behind your lordship's back? Long Feiyi's questions grew uglier and uglier. Finally, Han Yunqi lost her temper as well. She hadn't done anything, so why was she feeling guilty? Just as Long Feiyi was about to ask more questions, Han Yunqi suddenly shoved his hand aside. Long Feiyi was caught off guard, but Han Yunqi managed to break free. Unexpectedly, Han Yunqi not only brushed his hand aside, but gave him a vicious shove as well, sending him tumbling to the ground. She was angry too. She stood up and leaned towards Long Feiyi, her voice high and mighty. "Long Feiyi, I'll have to trouble you to clean your mouth. I, Han Yunqi, might be your wife in name, but it's not up to you to question my innocence. Gu and I never did anything. He's him, and I'm me. I don't know what he's here for, nor do I know what you mean by luring you to Medicine City. Also, I'll have to trouble you to send more guards to guard the courtyard. Otherwise, don't blame me the next time some shady people barge in. Also, I only pretended to be in pain to help him escape because the needle I stabbed him with was poisoned. If I didn't explain the antidote, it would have ruined the back of my hand. In any case, he did save my life, so I didn't want to repay his kindness with enmity. That's all." Han Yunqi finished speaking in one breath, gasping for breath. She didn't realize that she'd actually explained a lot. Of course, she also didn't realize that she'd done such a terrifying thing. One had to know that Zhao Mama had already fainted by the door from fright. Even the current emperor would have to think twice before being so fierce to His Highness Duke of Qin. Han Yunqi actually pushed the Duke of Qin to the ground and acted so high and mighty. Long Feiyi propped himself up on his elbows and stared at Han Yunqi in shock. He had to admit that he was caught off guard. He never thought that Han Yunqi would react like this. This woman, she actually dared to be even fiercer than him. Moreover, she was so fierce in such a magnanimous manner. Was she trying to explain herself in the last few sentences? He narrowed his eyes and stared at her with cold eyes. Even though he was lying on the ground, his aura was still a level higher. Han Yunqi also stared back at him, cold eyes, vowing to defend her dignity to the death. The two of them glared at each other, neither of them backing down an inch. Suddenly, Long Feiyi stood up, and Han Yunqi immediately retreated. Seeing him stand up, her anger still hadn't subsided. Her face was full of anger, and she didn't even blink. It was as if she wanted to bore a hole in his face with her glare. Who would have thought that Long Fei Yi would immediately approach her as soon as he stood up? She took a big step back and continued to stare at him stubbornly. Long Fei Yi then took another big step forward. Han Yunqi retreated again, but her gaze didn't back down. Long Fei Yi continued to approach, and Han Yunqi continued to retreat. Very soon, Han Yunqi's back was pressed against the wall, and Long Fei Yi was right in front of her, just a step away. The two of them were still fighting with their furious gazes, and the whole world was silent. Not knowing how long the silence lasted, suddenly, Long Fei Yi took a step forward and pressed his hand against the wall beside her head. It was just a step, but in that instant, Han Yunqi felt that his proud body was as tall as a mountain. His mysterious black robes contained a power that could split heaven and earth apart. Everything came crashing down on her with an earth-shattering force. Finally, Han Yunqi realized what she had just done. She was afraid. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi subconsciously wanted to explain, but who knew that Long Fei Yi suddenly lowered his head and sealed her lips with a kiss, sealing all her words. His lips were so cold. This was Han Yunqi's first thought. She didn't have time to feel more before the coldness immediately retreated. And at this moment, her heart fiercely thumped as she panicked. Long Fei Yi, what do you mean? Han Yunqi, from today onwards, your innocence is Ben Wang's. There won't be a next time, remember this well. After Long Fei Yi finished speaking, he let go of her hand and turned around to leave. Han Yunqi was left in a daze on the spot. Her heart was beating frantically, and she couldn't regain her senses for a long time. Her fingertips gently brushed against her lips, as if she could still feel the remnants of his breath and coldness. But why did she feel that everything just now was like a dream, so unreal? Although it was just a peck on the lips, it was a real kiss. Long Fei Yi, what do you mean by that? What did Long Fei Yi mean? Perhaps even he himself didn't know. As soon as he left, he immediately issued an order, deploy all forces to investigate Gu and Medicine City's Mu family. When he returned to his sleeping quarters, he lightly leapt onto the roof. Only then did his tense lips relax. He gently stroked his lips, his eyes flickering with an unfathomable light. His heart had always been as calm as stagnant water, as cold as ice. His life had always proceeded according to plan, but ever since this woman came, there had been one exception after another. Han Yunqi, since Ben Wang has decided to use you, he definitely won't give her any chance to betray him. The next day, Han Yunqi was still absent-minded and out of sorts when Long Fei Yi suddenly appeared at the door of her study. She immediately stood up in a panic, but Zhao Mama, who was just about to bring in tea, casually broke the teacup. Zhao Mama didn't see what happened after yesterday, but what happened before was enough to make her unable to forget it for the rest of her life. She didn't dare to make a sound and only pretended that she didn't see anything yesterday as she hurriedly cleaned up the broken pieces. However, Long Fei Yi's reaction was the most cold, as if nothing had happened. He said to Han Yunqi coldly, "Come out." "Do what?" Han Yunqi asked in her heart. The fierce her from yesterday had long disappeared. When she saw Long Fei Yi leave, she hurriedly followed. When the two of them arrived at the courtyard and saw a table full of golden needles and concealed weapons, Han Yunqi finally understood that this guy had come to teach her how to use concealed weapons. She had been absent-minded from yesterday until now and had forgotten about this matter. He was actually calm and could even come in person. She didn't know why, but a trace of disappointment flashed through Han Yunqi's heart. Long Fei, was it just your tyrannical declaration of ownership yesterday to restrict my freedom? Was that all? Chapter 197. Even Granny Zhao tactfully left. There was not a single person left in the yard and it was very quiet. Long Fei Yi was sitting there, currently choosing his golden needles. Han Yunqi was standing to the side, secretly looking at his face. She did not see wrong, he was indeed very calm. Yesterday's matter did not seem to have any effect on him. But that was her first kiss. Then what about him? Yesterday's kiss was too sudden and too short. The inexperienced her could not tell if it was his first time or if he was skilled. In short, she only had one impression, and that was that he was very domineering. Thinking about it, yesterday's scene unconsciously appeared in her mind. Han Yunqi's little face immediately turned red. At this time, Long Fei suddenly looked up. His eyes deeply stared at her as if he had seen through something. Han Yunqi's embarrassed face almost burned. She quickly turned around and ran away in a panic. "Your Highness, please wait. This concubine will bring some tea over." Long Fei Ye's deep black eyes flashed with a trace of playfulness that no one could see through. He did not call out to her and continued to pick out the golden needles on the stone table. Not long after, Han Yunqi really did bring over some tea and pastries. Now that she had time to adjust her mind, she had recovered quite well. At least she looked much more natural than before. "Your Highness, have some tea." She sat down in front of him and boldly looked into his eyes. Since this fellow was this calm, what was there for her to feel awkward about? Long Fei, yesterday was an accident. Next time, this princess will not be so easy to offend. Long Fei calmly took the teacup and slowly drank a few mouthfuls. Han Yunqi also learned from him, leisurely drinking the tea. The two of them were very quiet. It was the end of spring and the pear blossoms in the yard fluttered down. Looking at this scene from afar, it was like a painting. The scenery was beautiful, the people were beautiful, and even the years were beautiful. However, whether the heart of the person in the painting was calm or not, only the two of them knew. Long Fei had already sifted through the pile of concealed golden needles and picked out 5 that were suitable for Han Yunqi to learn. They were the plum blossom needle, needle, acupoint needle, array needle, and mouth needle. He picked up a plum blossom needle and began to teach. The plum blossom needles were 5-edged and slightly larger than the medical needles in Han Yunqi's hands. Han Yunqi had previously thought that such a golden needle would be very powerful. But who would have thought that the plum blossom needle was actually the lowest level, and also the easiest to learn golden needle concealed weapon? It was usually hidden in a pocket, and when it was needed, one could grab a handful and throw it at the enemy. One golden needle had 5 sharp blades, and a large number of them would have countless sharp blades. When the enemy was caught off guard, the hit rate was still very high. There's another way to use it. When you're escaping, throw it on the ground and it can stab the enemy's foot, giving you time to escape. When Long Fei said this, he handed a plum blossom needle to Han Yunqi and added coldly, "Of course, this prince thinks that you don't need to use this ability. When it's time to escape, one must escape." Han Yunqi muttered in her heart, but on the surface, she nodded seriously, "Amen, I understand." It seemed that she didn't need to practice the plum blossom needle. Long Fei took out 2 golden needle concealed weapons at the same time. The length and thickness were about the same as a normal medical needle, but one of them had 3 needle points at the end, and the other needle point was hooked. These 2 are called acupoint needle. As Long Fei said this, he raised his eyebrows and looked at Han Yunqi, saying indifferently, "Guess how it's used." Acupoint needle. Han Yunqi picked up the acupoint needle and gestured. She didn't even need to think before answering. This is specially used to attack the vital acupoints. Since it was called acupoint needle, it must be used to attack acupoints. But it had to be said that the Tang sect's research on this kind of needle was really ruthless. A normal golden needle piercing an acupoint was much scarier than using a finger to attack an acupoint, much less this kind of needle. It was simply asking for death. It wasn't sure if Han Yunqi was smart or if Long Fei Ye's question was too simple, but in any case, he didn't praise her for being smart. He continued, this needle can be used in close range or long range. To use it in close range, you need to get close to the enemy and attack when they're unprepared. To use it in long range, it tests your eyesight and hand strength. Han Yunqi nodded seriously. She knew that eyesight and hand strength were the key to using concealed weapons. Long Feiyi wasn't in a hurry to teach her these two abilities. He picked up the third type of golden needle concealed weapon. This needle was very small, only half the size of a normal medical needle. This is called a needle. Needle? Han Yunqi didn't understand. From what she knew, whenever a needle was mentioned, she would think of a clock. However, this needle wasn't a needle. Long Feiyi silently hid the golden needle between his fingers. His large hand suddenly reached towards Han Yunqi's face. Before his hand could get close, the golden needle was exposed and almost hurt her face. Han Yunqi didn't expect this. When she was about to dodge, Long Feiyi had already retracted his hand and asked rather patiently, "Do you understand?" Han Yunqi suddenly realized that the needle in needle referred to the fingers. She nodded as she hid the needle between her fingers. As expected of someone who held needles all year round, such a small trick wasn't difficult for her. Soon, her 10 fingers were full of needles. "Take this," she shouted sternly and stretched out both hands. In a moment, 8 needles surrounded Long Feiyi's face. The needle tips were less than half a needle away from his cheek. That was close. One had to know that if Han Yunqi had used just a little more strength, or if Long Feiyi had moved just a little, his face would have been done for. It was a habit that he had cultivated since he was young to never allow any danger to come near or anything that was out of his control. However, in that moment, if Han Yunqi wanted to kill him, it would be as easy as flipping her hand. In that instant, a murderous intent flashed across Long Feiyi's eyes. Han Yunqi didn't notice Long Feiyi's abnormality. She liked this kind of needle very much and retracted her hand with a chuckle. "This is fun. I'm good at it." As she spoke, she started to fiddle with the needle. She actually hid 4 to 5 golden needles in between her fingers without being exposed. She raised her hand to show Long Feiyi and said cockily, "Not a single one hit. There's still a follow-up." What a surprise. Before Long Feiyi could see clearly, Han Yunqi had already put down all the golden needles in between her fingers. She opened up her 5 fingers for Long Feiyi to see and laughed mischievously. She then put down her palm and touched the stone table. Once again, she showed Long Feiyi her 5 fingers were all closed. She smiled mysteriously at Long Feiyi. Her clear eyes flashed and a golden needle immediately appeared in between each of her fingers. She blinked again and the second golden needle appeared. Just like that, like magic, 5 golden needles appeared in between each of her fingers. Moreover, some of the golden needles appeared from the palm of her hand while some appeared from the back. Her fair and delicate little hand seemed to have magic as it kept changing. That skillful appearance, those who didn't know would think that she was a hidden weapon expert. However, Long Feiyi wasn't looking at her movements, but her eyes. That pair of eyes were lively and bright. Following her movements, they suddenly brightened and dimmed. It was as if they could speak and were very charming. Unknowingly, the killing intent in Long Feiyi's eyes had long disappeared without a trace. Gradually, Han Yunqi felt that something was wrong with him. She stopped and blinked her eyes at him. "Your Highness," Long Feiyi finally regained his senses. Finally, after last night, he couldn't remain calm and evaded. She casually took out the remaining 2 types of golden needle hidden weapons and introduced them simply. This is called a row of needles, also known as a shoe needle. It is placed at the tip of the shoe and is used to kick the opponent's vital points. This requires the leg to be strong. It would be even better if you have leg skills. This is called a mouth needle. As the name suggests, it is hidden in the mouth and is used to injure the opponent. This requires internal strength. Actually, the usage of the 5 types of golden needle hidden weapons were very simple and could be understood with a little explanation. However, it was far from simple to use. Especially when facing an enemy, if it was used well and accurately, it definitely wasn't something that could be grasped in a short period of time. Han Yunxi, who was anxious to learn, missed the moment when this big iceberg dodged. She anxiously said, "Your Highness, teach me internal strength. Also, teach me hand strength and eyesight." After Long Fei Yi had introduced it once, she didn't even need to think much before she knew how to apply the poison on these golden needle hidden weapons and what kind of poison to apply. In her previous life, she had never thought of becoming a poisoner. However, the situation forced her to do so, and there were people who saw her as a threat. Since that was the case, she might as well make this threat a reality. Not only would she be a poison doctor, relieving the sick, but she would also be a poisoner, protecting herself, punishing evil and eliminating traitors. Han Yunxi was in a hurry, but unfortunately, Long Fei Yi poured a basin of cold water on her. He stood up and said indifferently, "First, learn how to use it thoroughly. As for the rest, there's no hurry." His usual style was that his patience was limited. He wanted to leave after speaking, but Han Yunxi didn't let him go this time. She quickly chased in front of him to block his way and smiled obsequiously, "Your Highness, since you're here today, you should teach me altogether. I've been playing with golden needles since I was young, so I can learn these needle techniques quickly." Although Long Fei Yi didn't reply, he didn't move either. Seeing this, Han Yunxi thought that there was hope and quickly said, "Your Highness, Qinxia will understand with just a hint. I guarantee that I won't take up too much of your time." Long Fei Yi still said the same 2 words, "There's no hurry." "Your Highness," actually, unexpectedly, before Han Yunxi could finish speaking, Long Fei Yi interrupted her and said, "There's no hurry. Wait for Tang Li to come and let him teach you." When these words came out, Han Yunxi was dumbfounded. She couldn't say the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Long Fei Yi promised to teach her how to use concealed weapons, but he didn't promise how to teach her or to what extent. Thus, he simply explained a few things to her as a way of fulfilling his promise. She didn't have anything to say. This stingy guy. He clearly remembered what happened at the city gate last time. Wait for Tang Li to come and teach her. When would Tang Li come? Would he really come? Han Yunxi chuckled. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi had already turned around. There was a faint smile on his usually cold lips, as if he was secretly laughing. "Han Yunxi, there are many people who beg this prince, but you're the only one who's missing." Han Yunxi looked at Long Fei Yi's back and didn't chase after him. She narrowed her eyes. "Humph, want me to beg him? No way. Long Fei Yi, you're the one who introduced me to concealed weapons. Don't come begging me to learn in the end." Han Yunxi steeled her heart. That day, she began to poison a bunch of golden needles and concealed weapons. She couldn't help but think of Gu. Was the poison on the back of that guy's hand cured? Was his injury healed? Would he still dare to barge in the next time? She heard from Zhao Mama that since last night, not only Hibiscus Courtyard, but the guards in the entire estate had doubled. It was said that all the guards were transferred from the solitary courtyard. At this time, Gu wasn't anywhere else. He was at the Han residence. He sat on the roof of Han Yunxi's empty room. His handsome face was calm as he unwrapped the bandages on the back of his hand. Fortunately, he escaped quickly yesterday. Otherwise, his hand would have been ruined by Han Yunxi. Flesh-corroding powder. What was this girl's heart made of? How could she be so ruthless? Chapter 198. Gu undid the bandages on the back of his hand and quickly saw that there were still traces of blood on them. The poison had long been cured, but there was a pellet-sized wound on the back of his hand. Although it had scabbed over, it was a full layer lower than the skin around it, showing how deep the wound was. This was the result of the stone that Long Fei Yi had shot at him. If he hadn't been so shocked by the Tang clan's assassination weapons that he'd neglected his surroundings, he would have sensed Long Fei Yi's arrival long ago. His hand wouldn't have been injured so badly. He'd only used some medicine to make the wound scab over, saving him the trouble of bandaging it up. But it would take some time for him to fully recover. During this time, he wouldn't be able to use much strength on his hand. Of course, Gu didn't care about the wound. He was more concerned about the hidden weapons and needles on Han Yunqi's table. He couldn't be wrong. The needles on the stone table were all very exquisite. Whether in terms of craftsmanship or material, they definitely came from the Tang clan and weren't imitations made by commoners. The current Tang sect was famous for their hidden weapons. However, the Tang sect's poison techniques were also top-notch, and they were on par with hidden weapons. Unfortunately, their poison techniques had declined, and gradually, the number of people who knew about them became fewer and fewer. Unfortunately, he knew about them. Where did Poison Lass get these things from? Or was she somehow related to the Tang clan? Could it be that her mysterious poison skills came from the Tang clan? But judging from the way she treated poisons and her style, it didn't seem like it. Her mother was Lady Tianqin, but was her father really Hong Kongan? Could this Poison Lass be the person he'd been searching for all this time? Gu wanted nothing more than to go back to the Duke of Qin's estate and ask Han Yunqi face to face. Unfortunately, he couldn't act rashly right now. Long Fei's movements were very fast. Last night, the Duke of Qin's estate guards had become even stricter. Most abominable of all, that fellow was even investigating all of Tianning's properties to find out his background. Gu did not care about the injury on the back of his hand, but it did not mean that he did not hold a grudge. As he waved his hand, he narrowed his bewitching eyes and muttered, "Long Fei Yi, there will be a day when this young master will settle old and new grudges with you." Han Yunqi had long forgotten the question Gu had asked before he was plotted against by Long Fei Yi. For the next few days, she didn't leave the Duke of Qin's manor. She was busy applying different poisons to the concealed weapons. At the same time, she diligently practiced the various methods of drawing out needles. She was already familiar with them, so after a few days of practice, she became very adept. Moreover, she also played many new tricks outside of the methods that Long Fei Yi had taught her. It was a pity that she didn't have enough strength. She couldn't use them from a long distance, and she could only use some of her golden needles at close range. She also had to be faster than her opponent. She'd never come across such things before, but Han Yunqi was very interested. She even dragged a few guards over to practice, scaring them so much that they didn't dare to show themselves. Long Fei Yi had nothing to do these days. He stayed at home, but didn't come to Han Yunqi's place. He was in a good mood and actually agreed to Grand Concubine Yi's request. With a few words, he found an important position for Zhang Sun Che, Murong Wanru's current husband. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments was a fourth-rank official. In the capital, where one could hit a few third-rank officials with a casual throw of a stone, a fourth-rank official was nothing. But this was the Ministry of Appointments, the head of the civil officials. The position of the assistant minister was second only to that of the Minister of State. He was in charge of all civil officials in the world, such as appointments, examinations, promotions, and promotions. With such a position, how could he be afraid of others looking down on him? Even the higher-ranked officials had to be polite and didn't dare to offend him. Naturally, the higher-ranked officials were appointed by the emperor himself. But who could guarantee that their relatives and friends would have a smooth career without asking the Ministry of Appointments for help? In short, the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments wasn't just a fat job, but an extremely high status. Because of Murong Wanru's special status, no one dared to provoke her at Marquis Pingbei's estate. As a newlywed, Zhang Sun Che waited on her like a grandson. Now that her maternal family had found him such a good position, Murong Wanru's face looked very good. She came back personally to thank him, but Long Feiyi didn't even want to see her. Han Yunqi had heard all of this from Zhao Mama's gossip. She thought, Murong Wanru's already married off, so what else can she do? If the Duke of Qin could find a position for Zhang Sun Che, she should be satisfied and quiet down. In any case, Han Yunqi gradually threw Murong Wanru to the back of her mind. While she pondered over her assassination weapons, she also pondered over the poison Long Feiyi had given her. But she made no progress. Soon, it was the 15th. The 15th was the day Han Yunqi would be volunteering to treat patients at the Han family's South Clinic in the city. Sifang Clinic had released the news early, and people had been lining up at the South Clinic since last night. This was the most crucial step for Han Yunqi to revitalize the Han family clinic and re-establish the Han family's name. No matter how busy she was, she didn't dare to delay. She woke up early and specially changed into a set of simple and clean clothes, arriving at the South Clinic early in the morning. Who knew that the line was already very long? Han Yunqi peeked through the crack in the door and found that not only were there poor people in the line, there were also many well-dressed rich people. Although these people were only here for her sake, Han Yunqi believed that one day, they'd be willing to walk into the Han family's medical clinics as well. Just as Han Yunqi was making preparations, little Yi suddenly popped out from under the counter. Sister! Han Yunqi jumped in fright. Little guy, when did you come? Little Yi tilted his head and looked at her, blinking his large, adorable eyes. He asked very seriously, Sister, are you sure you can handle it? Han Yunqi was amused by little Yi's adorable and serious expression. She pretended to be angry, narrowing her eyes as she approached and asked coldly, Han Yuni, are you looking down on me? Unexpectedly, little Yi wasn't afraid and became even more serious. Sister, you're good at detoxification, not treating illnesses. What if someone wants to frame you and give you a difficult problem? The scene outside isn't small. Han Yunqi immediately became alert when she heard this. Of course, she knew that she was a poison doctor and wasn't an expert in treating illnesses. However, no one stipulated that the patients had to be cured of their illnesses for the free clinic. It was normal if they couldn't be cured. She could provide advice or recommend them to other doctors. However, little Yi's words reminded Han Yunqi that if someone wanted to make a fuss about this matter, it wouldn't be good for her reputation. Just as Han Yunqi was falling silent, little Yi tugged on her sleeve and said sneakily, Sister, look behind you. Han Yunqi was deep in thought when she inadvertently turned around. She saw a white-robed gentleman standing behind her. Piled stones like jade, pine trees like emerald green, his beauty was unparalleled in this world. Such a poem immediately popped into Han Yunqi's mind. This person was none other than the youngest head of the Imperial Physician Academy, the authority of Tianning Country's medical community, Gu Beiyue. He smiled faintly, a very simple smile, but it seemed to brighten and clean the entire world. At least, Han Yunqi's world was brightened. Gu Beiyue, why have you come? Han Yunqi was pleasantly surprised. In hindsight, she realized that little Yi's worries were due to Gu Beiyue's reminder. Otherwise, how could a little brat like him, who spent most of his time cooped up at home and immersed himself in medicine, know so much about such complicated relationships? The free clinic is such a benevolent event. How could esteemed Wang Fei forget to call this one along? Gu Beiyue was serious. Without a doubt, Gu Beiyue was worried that she'd be schemed against and that this free clinic would be disrupted, so he'd specially come to help her. This fellow, helping her was one thing, but he could actually come up with such a high-sounding reason to ask her back. Even she, who had a tacit understanding between them, was too embarrassed to expose him. Actually, she'd long wanted to invite him, but was worried that he wouldn't come. After all, he was a servant in the palace. Wouldn't helping her and the Han family be the same as offending the Emperor and Empress Dowager? She didn't want to expose his intentions, but she still had to remind him of the complicated relationships involved. Han Yunxi said half-jokingly, "Imperial Physician Gu, you'd better think it through. If you lose your job and the free clinic doesn't charge you, you'll have nothing to eat." Gu Beiyue smiled faintly. Based on his personality, there were only two possibilities for him to come. Either he already had a plan in mind, or he didn't want to think too much and followed his heart's truest feelings and came directly. No matter what, he was here. Esteemed Wang Fei, a doctor travels the world and earns a living based on his medical skills, not others. He smiled as he replied. His smile was always gentle. He was clearly a doctor who didn't even have the strength to truss up a chicken, but he had the power to make people feel at ease. With his words, Han Yunxi set her worries at rest. Saying more and reminding more would instead be questioning and insulting him. Han Yunxi was very straightforward. "Imperial Physician Gu, please." When Han Yunxi appeared at the door, the expectant crowd all wanted to kneel in greeting, but Han Yunxi immediately stopped them. "Today, I'm only a doctor, not Qin Wang Fei. Everyone, there's no need to stand on ceremony. If anyone wishes to kneel to Qin Wang Fei, then please leave. Esteemed Wang Fei won't be seeing patients." Her words were crisp and direct, without any pretense. Everyone who heard her felt admiration and thought of how the Duke of Qin and esteemed Wang Fei had ridden back to the city on the same horse. Now it seemed that only a free and easy woman like this could enter His Highness Duke of Qin's eyes. There were many people seeking medical treatment, but there were also many onlookers. In a nearby tea house, Murong Wanru was sitting alone by the window. Cold as she watched the scene unfold, her lips quirked up in a mocking smile. "Han Yunxi, the best part is yet to come." Murong Wanru was currently at Marquis Pingbei's estate. Aside from being dissatisfied with her husband, she was quite satisfied with everything else. At the Duke of Qin's estate, she was only an adopted daughter who had to look after Grand Concubine Yi's face. Now at Marquis Pingbei's estate, she was the Buddha of the house that everyone worshipped. This was the feeling of being a guest and a host. Wasn't that what she wanted the most? But she was very clear that if she didn't take care of Han Yunxi, that person in the palace would never allow her to live comfortably. This free medical consultation was a great opportunity for him to do so. But just as Murong Wanru was preparing to watch the show, Han Yunxi suddenly invited Gu Beiyue out. "Everyone, today the South Clinic is extremely honored to have invited Imperial Physician Gu Beiyue to participate in the free clinic. I'm sure everyone knows of Imperial Physician Gu's medical skills. Let's not waste words and begin now." Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue both sat down, but the entire scene was silent. Whether it was the patients in line or the onlookers, they were all stunned. Heavens, one Qin Wang Fei was inconceivable enough, but now there was the head imperial physician. This time, the Han family really had too much face. Seventh Madam and little watched from inside the doors, very happy. It was as if they could see the Han family's future. Meanwhile, in the tea house, Murong Wanru had long risen to her feet in shock. Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue, why did he come? Did the Empress Dowager know about this? With Gu Beiyue here, what kind of difficult and complicated illness could be difficult for them to treat? At the very least, Murong Wanru couldn't find one right away. Murong Wanru didn't watch any longer, but hurried into the palace. Chapter 199. With Gu Beiyue holding the fort, the Han family clinic in the south of the city was bustling with activity. Leaving aside the wealthy families, many of the city's high officials and nobles, as well as members of the imperial family, had rushed over in hopes of getting a spot in the queue. As for the fact that Gu Beiyue was holding a clinic in the name of the Han family, it was completely ignored. Gu Beiyue was the head of the imperial physician courtyard and Emperor Tianhui's personal physician. Without Emperor Tianhui's appointment, who would be able to invite him if he didn't give them face? Murong Wanru hadn't even arrived when the Empress Dowager found out about Gu Beiyue's attendance at the clinic. Spies kept coming to report the bustling scene outside the south of the city, making her restless. Her anger grew stronger and stronger until she threw caution to the wind. "Someone come," summoned Gu Beiyue. "Just say that I'm very uncomfortable. Have him come here immediately," the Empress Dowager ordered through gritted teeth. The eunuch was in a hurry to go, but Li Mama quickly stopped him. "Mistress, you can't. Why can't I? He's an outsider, using the palace's salary to work for the Han family. Don't think I won't touch him just because his medical skills are superior." The Empress Dowager was furious. "Esteemed Empress Dowager, that's a free clinic. All the common people in the city are watching. If you summon Imperial Physician Gu back like this, it'll have a bad influence." Li Mama's reminder calmed the Empress Dowager down. Li Mama was right. That was a free clinic. If she summoned Gu Beiyue back in front of everyone, if Han Yunxi took the chance to defame her, the common people wouldn't spare her. The Empress Dowager stood up and paced back and forth, not daring to act rashly, but unwilling to give up. Is this Gu Beiyue really stupid or pretending to be stupid? See how I deal with him when he comes back. The Empress Dowager was in a fit of anger when Murong Wanru arrived. She was about to complain when she saw the Empress Dowager's gloomy face and knew the situation wasn't good. But she was anxious and had to explain herself. "Esteemed Empress Dowager, Wanru arranged everything long ago. This time, not only could Han Yunxi's reputation fall, but the Han family would never be able to rise again. But I didn't expect Imperial Physician Gu to. Enough." The Empress Dowager could not summon Gu Beiyue for the time being. She changed the topic and said sternly, "Put away your cheap tricks. Han Yunxi is not that easy to deal with. Aijia has reminded you again and again not to underestimate her. Did you listen?" Murong Wanru was very unconvinced, but she didn't dare to refute. She hurriedly knelt down. Wanru has always remembered Her Highness the Empress Dowager's teachings and has never underestimated the enemy. But this time, what about this time? It's not like you haven't seen Han Yunxi's poison and medical skills before, but you're still trying to scheme against us at the free clinic. Did I overestimate you, or did you grow stupid because you've been too comfortable after marriage?" The Empress Dowager asked angrily, clearly implying something. She'd only been married for a short time, so where did the word comfortable come from? Murong Wanru's heart trembled with fear. She didn't know how to reply, but the Empress Dowager changed the topic to a mocking laugh. "The position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments is a cushy one. A few days ago, the madams of Marquis Pingnan's estate and the Duke's estate both mentioned it to me. I was still undecided and didn't know who to give it to." "Who knew? Your older brother from your maternal family has quite the skills." As expected, the Empress Dowager had been paying close attention to the developments at Marquis Pingbei's estate. "Esteemed Empress Dowager, don't worry. Wanru knows what to do. May esteemed Empress Dowager give Wanru a few more days. As long as I find a chance, Wanru definitely won't." This was the third time the Empress Dowager had told Han Yunxi to stop. But this time, she didn't scold her, but kept her mocking smile as she beckoned for Murong Wanru to come over. It had to be said that this old lady was even harder to please than Grand Concubine Yi. She was so unpredictable that Murong Wanru couldn't figure her out. She stood up and walked over with quick steps, but the Empress Dowager took her hand and had her come closer. This was the first time they were so close. What did the Empress Dowager want to tell her? Murong Wanru's heart sped up as she had a bad premonition. Wanru, I'll point out a clear path for you, all right? The Empress Dowager's voice was very, very low, especially terrifying. A clear path. Did the Empress Dowager have a good way to deal with Han Yunxi? Although Murong Wanru was flustered, she was still happy. She hastened to reply, Wanru is slow-witted. May esteemed Empress Dowager give me more pointers. The Empress Dowager's smile deepened as her voice dropped even lower. Wanru, say, if Grand Concubine Yi dies by Han Yunxi's hands, will the Duke of Qin spare her? Murong Wanru immediately backed away at these words, her face ashen. She quickly muffled her mouth, afraid that she'd scream and startle the people around them. She never expected the Empress Dowager to be so direct as to take Grand Concubine Yi's life. Seeing Murong Wanru's shocked expression, the Empress Dowager calmly picked up a teacup and took a few slow sips. What, did I scare you? Murong Wanru admitted that she really was scared. She'd betrayed Grand Concubine Yi to rely on the Empress Dowager, but she'd never thought of harming Grand Concubine Yi's life. After all, she'd been adopted by Grand Concubine Yi since she was 6 years old. Without Grand Concubine Yi, she didn't even know if she'd still be alive, or where she'd be. She had a lot of resentment towards Grand Concubine Yi, but the person she wanted to deal with most was Han Yunxi. Murong Wanru stared blankly at the Empress Dowager without replying. Displeasure flitted through the Empress Dowager's eyes, but her face was still calm. She spoke as if chatting idly. If the Duke of Qin can take the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, then I can at least take back the title of Marquis Pingbei. Murong Wanru was so frightened that her legs turned to jelly. She almost fell to her knees. Esteemed Empress Dowager, have mercy. Have mercy. The Empress Dowager couldn't stop the Duke of Qin from finding a position for Zhang Sunche, but she had plenty of ways to have the Emperor destroy Marquis Pingbei's estate, strip away the hereditary title, confiscate the family's properties, and suppress Marquis Pingbei's estate to death. When the time came, would the Duke of Qin still interfere with court politics for her sake and clash with the Emperor again? Murong Wanru didn't believe he would. The fate of Marquis Pingbei's estate was her fate. Marquis Pingbei's honor and disgrace were her honor and disgrace as well. She couldn't bear the consequences. You're a smart child. I've already pointed out the path for you. Go back and think over what you should do. The Empress Dowager didn't give Murong Wanru a chance to speak. She waved her hand, indicating for Murong Wanru to withdraw. She only sighed faintly. Alas, remember, my patience is limited. I'll only give you 3 months. You can only succeed, not fail. Murong Wanru didn't know how she'd walked out, but her ears kept repeating the Empress Dowager's words. Take back Marquis Pingbei's title. Take back Marquis Pingbei's title. It wasn't until she left the palace gates and a cool breeze brushed against her face that Murong Wanru came to her senses. She immediately shook her head. No, she definitely wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. If Grand Concubine Yi dies at Han Yunxi's hands, if Grand Concubine Yi dies at Han Yunxi's hands. She muttered to herself. Suddenly, she realized that her previous methods were just as the Empress Dowager had said. They were all low-level tricks. They were nothing more than little tricks. The Empress Dowager's move was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. In the end, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. Murong Wanru's lips drew up in a sinister curve. By now, she'd already tossed Grand Concubine Yi's kindness to the back of her mind. She only had 3 months. This was a chance to fight for life after death. She wouldn't allow herself to fail. It looked like she'd have to go back to the Duke of Qin's estate more often in the coming days. Murong Wanru's men didn't make a move, and with Gu Beiyue keeping watch, the free clinic went smoothly for the entire day. Fortunately, 7th Madam had the foresight to limit the number of patients early on and refused to wait in line. Otherwise, Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue wouldn't be able to finish until tomorrow night. This time's free clinic was a resounding success. Han Yunxi never thought that her success would spread her name throughout Cloud Realm Continent's medical community. Even the medical academy's classes mentioned her name. The free clinic had just finished packing up when someone made an appointment for next month's 15th. There were even people asking if the other 3 clinics would have free clinics as well and which doctors they'd invite. Han Yunxi helped tidy up as she tilted her head towards Gu Beiyue and asked in a low voice, "Imperial Physician Gu, will there be a next time?" Gu Beiyue only smiled wordlessly, but Han Yunxi knew there would be a next time. She smiled sweetly at Gu Beiyue. Seeing this woman so happy made Gu Beiyue happy as well. Actually, there wasn't just a next time, but the one after that. If possible, he hoped that he and Han Yunxi could keep up this act of kindness forever. Esteemed Wang Fei, let's put up the notice tonight. In the future, I'll be here with you on the 15th of every month. Gu Beiyue, you've got guts. Aren't you afraid that the masters of the palace will make trouble for you? Han Yunxi naturally hoped he'd come again, but she couldn't harm him. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't worry. I have my own ways to deal with them. Gu Beiyue's smile was very gentle, but it had its own reassuring power. This could be considered acting first and reporting later. Putting up the notice first and letting the entire city know, it would be difficult for the Empress Dowager or the Emperor to stop him from continuing to participate. As for what he would face after returning to the palace, he didn't want to think too much about it for now. Then next time, be there or be square. Han Yunxi was reassured. On the side, little heard this and thought Gu Beiyue was about to leave. He ran over in a hurry and hugged Gu Beiyue. Big brother Beiyue, my mother said you've worked hard today. You've contributed the most, so she wants you to come to the estate for a meal. You can't leave. Han Yunxi raised an eyebrow as she studied the little brat. She asked seriously, when did you start calling me Big Brother Beiyue? How come I didn't know? He's contributed the most, but I've contributed the most too. Little was still shy. His little face reddened as he hid behind Gu Beiyue. He had been assisting Big Brother Beiyue today and discovered that Big Brother Beiyue was the most approachable and gentle person in the world. How he wished Big Brother Beiyue could become his brother-in-law. Unfortunately, he already had one. He had never seen his brother-in-law before, but he had heard many people say that his brother-in-law was the most arrogant and coldest person in the world. Gu Beiyue smiled and said nothing. Little carefully poked his head out again and actually said, Big sis, mother was afraid Big Brother Beiyue wouldn't give her face, so she wants you to invite him. Han Yunxi couldn't tease him anymore. Gu Beiyue laughed out loud and pulled little in front of him. He rubbed his little head and teased, then go ask your big sis. Is she inviting him or not? Little was serious. He immediately looked back at Han Yunxi. Big sis, hurry up and invite Big Brother Beiyue. Mother has prepared a lot of delicious food. Is this child a little smarter, or a little dumber? Han Yunxi smiled helplessly. Gu Beiyue, will you do me the honor? It will be my honor. Of course Gu Beiyue would agree. Chapter 200. Just as had said, 7th Madam had prepared a table of delicacies and fine wine to celebrate Han Yunxi and the rest. Not just but even 7th Madam had a particularly good impression of Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue had changed out of his white medical gown and was now wearing a crescent white gown. He looked like a gentleman from an aristocratic family, gentle as jade. There wasn't much etiquette at the dining table. Instead, they chatted and laughed. However, just as they were happily chatting, a golden needle suddenly flew towards Han Yunxi and accurately landed in Han Yunxi's bowl. Gu Beiyue's eyes flashed. He was about to make a move when he saw the golden needle in the bowl and suddenly froze. It was a 5-bladed plum blossom needle, the lowest grade of the Tang clan's needles. However, even if it was the lowest grade, it wasn't that easy to obtain the real thing. Judging from the craftsmanship and material of this plum blossom needle, it was definitely from the Tang clan. Was it someone from the Tang clan? Before anyone could react, Gu Beiyue's mind flashed with multiple thoughts and hypotheses. Still, his gentle, jade-like face didn't betray any of them. Han Yunxi stood up abruptly. At this moment, and 7th Madam panicked. 7th Madam instinctively shielded in her arms and immediately shouted, "Guards! Guard!" Before she could shout a second time, a man dressed in red appeared out of thin air and landed in front of 7th Madam. He lowered his head slightly, like a mysterious fox demon from a dark world, his entire body emitting a dangerous aura. His long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly as he gave 7th Madam a meaningful look. 7th Madam was so frightened that she couldn't close her gaping mouth and couldn't make a sound. On the other side, Han Yunxi said sternly, "Gu, it's you again. Even if the Han clan's guards came, they wouldn't be able to deal with this guy." Han Yunxi directly rushed over and stretched out her arms to protect 7th Madam and behind her. She fiercely questioned, "You're haunting us. What do you want?" Faced with Han Yunxi's ferocious attitude, Gu Qishao didn't get angry. Instead, his dark eyes lit up. He didn't know if he would mind if this woman really wanted to kill him one day. In any case, he didn't take the poisoning incident to heart. Although his long and narrow eyes were still narrowed, his smile was especially mischievous. "I won't really hurt you, why are you so nervous? You're scaring me," Han Yunxi said unhappily, her gaze drifting to his right hand. Seeing that it was perfectly fine except for a thin layer of gauze, she finally relaxed. Her glance didn't escape Gu Qishao's eyes. Delighted, he waved his hand in front of Han Yunxi's face. "What, are you worried about my hand? Why isn't it? It's such a waste of my poison." Han Yunxi's tone was sharp and vicious, but Gu didn't mind. His right hand waved like a magic trick, revealing a plum blossom needle. "This is yours, right?" Gu had 2 plum blossom needles in his hands. He had taken them from Leisurely Cloud Pavilion last time. "You stole my things. Give it back." Han Yunxi reached out to snatch it back. Although she had many plum blossom claws in her residence, she wouldn't mind if there were more of them. She had asked around and found that the Tang clan's authentic weapons rarely leaked out. No one noticed that Gu Beiyue revealed a shocked expression. He originally thought that the golden needle concealed weapon was Gu's, but he didn't expect it to be Han Yunxi's. Whether it was the plum blossom needle in the bowl or the one in Gu's hand, they were all authentic weapons from the Tang clan. The Tang clan never interacted with outsiders. The Tang clan's concealed weapons were either destroyed after use, unable to be used a second time, or recycled. No matter how worthless they were, they wouldn't easily fall into the hands of outsiders. Was this woman related to the Tang clan? Her poison skills were of unknown origin, but they were so exquisite. If she was related to the Tang clan, could it be? Gu Beiyue seemed to have thought of something. His gentle eyes suddenly lit up like the blazing sun, full of hope. Gu had been hiding in the imperial capital for so many days, and finally found a chance to get close to Han Yunxi. Of course, he had to get to the bottom of this. As for the Han family and the imperial physician, he didn't care at all, so he didn't avoid it. Thus, he was very direct. Your biological father isn't Hong Kongan, right? When Gu said this, Han Yunxi was so shocked that she almost fell. How did this guy know about this secret? She always thought that only Hong Kongan knew about this. Hong Kongan couldn't have told him. Could it be that this guy knew about Madame Tianqin's secret? Han Yunxi's heart thumped wildly. Of course, even though she was full of suspicion, she still denied it at once. Gu, what nonsense are you talking about? What do you want? Unexpectedly, Gu was very serious. The Tang clan's women don't marry outside the family, and Madame Tianqin isn't from the Tang clan. Therefore, your father must be from the Tang clan. Cough cough. What was this all about? Han Yunxi widened her bright eyes and stared at Gu. Gu didn't know what to think anymore. He hurriedly explained, the Tang clan's concealed weapons are not passed to outsiders, otherwise, where did you get this from? So, Han Yunxi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Instead of answering him, she asked, why should I tell you? The plum blossom needle was given to her by Tang Li. Tang Li was wanted by the Tang clan because he ran away from his marriage. No matter who asked, she couldn't betray Tang Li. Furthermore, Tang Li gave her the concealed weapons because of Long Fei Yi. She couldn't reveal the friendship between Long Fei Yi and Tang Li. Poison girl, this is very important to me. I risked my life to ask you this. Long Fei Yi's secret guards are still outside. Can you really bear not to tell me? Gu looked pitiful. She didn't know if he was telling the truth. Han Yunxi pretended to sigh. All right, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. This is a fake. I bought it from the roadside for fun. She was suspicious. Why did this guy care so much about the Tang clan's concealed weapons? Poison girl, aren't you being too unkind? This is clearly the real deal. Gu was unhappy. Unexpectedly, Han Yunxi took the opportunity to ask, how can you be so sure that this is the real deal? What's your relationship with the Tang clan? Han Yunxi had been studying these concealed weapons for some time now. Of course, she had compared the real deal with the fake. If one wasn't an expert, or someone like her who had the real deal with the fake, it would be very difficult to tell the difference in a short period of time. Because I've studied it. This is definitely the real deal. Gu was very serious. Why are you studying the Tang clan's concealed weapons? How important is this to you? Han Yunxi continued to ask. Gu was about to answer when he suddenly stopped. He realized that he had fallen into Han Yunxi's trap. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly closed in. He threatened, Poison girl, this young master is asking you one last time. Are you going to tell me, or not? He was clearly emitting a dangerous aura from his eyes, but Han Yunxi was strangely not afraid. She put on a fake smile and suddenly raised her hand. The needle appeared and was about to sweep past Gu's face. Unfortunately, Gu was faster than her and grabbed her wrist. Han Yunxi kicked out. Just as the needle hidden in the tip of her shoe was about to pierce Gu's knee, he easily dodged and took the opportunity to trip Han Yunxi. Ah! Han Yunxi suddenly lost her center of gravity and toppled to the right. Gu Qixiao leisurely reached out and caught her by the waist. He leaned forward, his beautiful eyes filled with a sinister threat. Poison girl, you've already used up your last chance. Now, unexpectedly, before he could finish speaking, Han Yunxi suddenly spat out a golden needle from her mouth. Gu did not expect this and dodged to the side. Han Yunxi took the opportunity to grab his injured right hand and unceremoniously stabbed the needle hidden in between her fingers. Gu was in so much pain that his face turned pale. Han Yunxi struggled out of his grip and pulled away from him. She said coldly, I bought these concealed weapons at a high price from the black market. I have nothing to do with the Tang clan. It's up to you to believe it or not. Gu was about to ask again when the silent Gu Beiyue suddenly shouted, Guards! Guards, there's an assassin. Protect the princess consort. No one expected Gu Beiyue to call for help at this time. Gu obviously didn't care about the Long Feiyi guards. However, these days, the Long Feiyi's secret guards had been secretly following Han Yunxi. When the secret guards didn't enter the Han residence, Gu slipped in. With Gu Beiyue's shout, it was terrible. Reality proved that Gu's good temper was only towards Han Yunxi. Gu's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness and he viciously threw the plum blossom needle at Gu Beiyue. Meddling in other people's business, go to hell. He was so ruthless that it was as if he had turned into a different person. He immediately turned to leave after throwing the needle. His right hand was still injured, so he had no choice but to leave. The strength and speed of the plum blossom needle was not inferior to the standard of a concealed weapon expert. Gu Beiyue seemed to be scared out of his wits as he stood rooted to the ground. Dodge it! Han Yunxi shouted. However, even she felt that it was too late. The plum blossom needle was about to sink into Gu Beiyue's heart. She closed her eyes in despair, not daring to look. Seventh Madam and Little Eve were already scared out of their wits and had their eyes tightly shut. However, they didn't see that just a second before the plum blossom needle was about to sink into Gu Beiyue's heart, Gu Beiyue revealed a faint smile. An invisible force silently flowed out of his body and silently caused the plum blossom needle to deviate. Everything happened in an instant. The five-bladed plum blossom needle pierced into the right side of his heart. It was very, very deep. One could imagine that if it had sunk into his heart, he would have died without a doubt. She wondered how Gu would feel if he knew that he had failed and couldn't even kill a weak imperial physician. In short, when Han Yunxi opened her eyes and saw Gu Beiyue clutching his chest and kneeling on the ground, she was scared out of her wits and rushed over without thinking. Gu Beiyue. Hang in there. You must hang in there. Gu Beiyue's face was deathly pale. There was a large patch of blood on his chest and hands. He raised his head to look at Han Yunxi and immediately fainted. Han Yunxi had saved many people in her previous life and this life. No matter how serious or urgent the injury was, as long as she started to act, once she entered the state of mind, she could calmly calm down. However, this time, she couldn't calm down. She couldn't imagine how sad she would be if this man with superb medical skills and gentle as jade died just like that. She should have immediately checked the wound, stopped the bleeding, assessed the risk of pulling out the concealed weapon, and prepared for heavy bleeding. However, she panicked and messed up her order. She used all her strength to rummage through her medical bag, taking out all her instruments and medicines. Perhaps she wasn't panicking, but was afraid. How could Gu Qishao miss when faced with a person who didn't even have the strength to truss up a chicken? Such a vicious needle must have been filled with killing intent. Han Yunxi didn't dare to look at the concealed weapon. Seeing Gu Beiyue bleeding so much, she knew that the wound was very deep. She was afraid. She knew better than anyone that under the medical conditions of ancient times, the needle in the heart couldn't be removed. Even if it was forcefully removed, he wouldn't be able to survive. Chapter 201. Just as Han Yunxi was at a loss, Eve anxiously tugged at her hand. Sis, look, it's not on the heart. There's hope. There's hope. Han Yunxi whipped her head around, only to see little Eve tearing open Gu Beiyue's robes and wiping away all the blood around them. There was only one spot that was still bleeding profusely, just to the right of his heart. That was undoubtedly the wound, the place where the plum blossom needle had pierced. The needle had pierced so deeply that it had long sunk into the body and was invisible to the naked eye. Although this spot was very close to the heart, it wasn't on the heart. How could Gu have missed? Was it such a coincidence that the needle had missed by just a little bit? A little bit of deviation and a life was spared. Han Yunqi didn't have time to ponder so much. She only felt that the gloomy sky had suddenly cleared and the whole world had brightened up. There was hope. She had to save him immediately. Han Yunqi immediately perked up and took out some hemostatic medicine. She first performed a simple hemostatic treatment on Gu Beiyue, then had seventh concubine find someone to carry Gu Beiyue into the room. This was different from the poison needles in Mu Qingwu's body. This wasn't a detoxification, but a simple removal of the needles. It wasn't that complicated. Quickly brought over a medicinal paste called needle removal powder. The prescription was 3 grams of spirit magnetite, 1 gram of croton cream, 5 grams of castor beans, 6 dung beetles, and 2 grams of musk. As the name implied, this was used to remove broken needles from the flesh. She couldn't help but marvel at the power of traditional Chinese medicine. Spirit magnetite was the most important ingredient in this prescription. Spirit magnetite was very strong, and ancient gold and silver needles usually contained iron, so it could be used to draw out the gold needles. As for the other ingredients, they had lubricating, anti-inflammatory, pain-relieving, and hemostatic effects. However, Han Yunqi had already used 3 needle removal powder, but there was no effect at all. A hint of puzzlement flashed in Han Yunqi's eyes. She quickly brought out a Tang sect hidden weapon and placed it next to the spirit magnet. But who would have thought that there would be no magnetic attraction at all? In other words, the purity of the Tang sect's golden needles was extremely high, and the iron content was so low that it was negligible. The Tang sect's hidden weapons truly live up to their reputation. If the wound was too deep and the bleeding could not be stopped, it would basically be impossible to remove it. If the wound was laced with poison, even she, who carried the detoxification system, would find it difficult to deal with such poison, let alone other poison doctors. The poison Tang sect's hidden weapons were truly powerful. Han Yunqi didn't know if she should be happy or worried about this discovery. Well, now that she was facing Gu Beiyue, she was more worried. Damn it! Han Yunqi cursed. She was not cursing the Tang sect's hidden weapons, but Gu, who had hurt the innocent. Sis, what should we do? It's too risky to remove the needle. Little didn't have much experience, but he had read many medical records. His worries were justified. This plum blossom needle had no poison, so Han Yunqi couldn't use the detoxification system to estimate the exact depth of the wound. Without that, it was difficult to assess the risk of an operation. If the wound was too deep and the bleeding couldn't be stopped, then wouldn't that be murder? Han Yunqi's eyes were heavy as she stared at Gu Beiyue's chest, her quiet little face filled with gravity. Seeing this, little didn't dare disturb her. He really felt sorry for Uncle Beiyue. They were here to celebrate, but he ended up like this for no reason. After a while, the pensive Han Yunqi suddenly snapped her fingers and said seriously, go stand guard at the door. Don't let anyone disturb us, quick. Little rejoiced. He knew that big sis Yunqi had a way and wanted to stay behind to see for himself. But her tone was a strict order. Saving a life was urgent, so he couldn't dawdle. He nodded seriously. Don't worry, big sis. As soon as the door closed, Han Yunqi glanced back at Gu Beiyue. Seeing that he was still unconscious, she didn't use her medical pouch as a cover. Instead, she took out the plum blossom needle she carried on her person. With a thought, the needles disappeared into thin air and were hidden in the detoxification system. To her, the detoxification system was like an intelligent space. Whether it was taking things out or hiding things, she could do as she pleased. However, hiding things took a lot of effort. Still, she had no idea that Gu Beiyue was watching all of this. He wasn't actually unconscious, but just a little weak. When he saw Han Yunxi walk over, he closed his eyes again. In the silence of the room, Gu Beiyue was filled with bewilderment. Soon enough, he opened his eyes again and saw Han Yunxi sitting on the edge of the bed, her head leaning against the bedpost. Han Yunxi looked like she was resting, but she was actually exhausting her energy. The things hidden in the detoxification system had to be related to poison. The finished poison, the raw materials, the antidote, and the simple tools needed to detoxify the poison. The reason why the golden needles could be hidden in the detoxification system was because the golden needles were one of the raw materials used to make poison. At this moment, the detoxification system was preparing the poison potion on its own. The poison potion could react with the gold needles, melting them and turning them into gold liquid. The gold liquid and poison potion would react with each other to form a finished poison. This process was very delicate and complicated. If it was done manually, who knew how long it would take? However, it was handed over to the detoxification system. Han Yunxi only needed to spend a little energy. Actually, making poison was considered easy for her. However, she didn't know why, but she felt more tired and time-consuming every time she activated the detoxification system. The detoxification system hadn't been used for long, so it couldn't have aged so quickly. She didn't think too much about it. She just assumed that she had been too tired and didn't have time to recuperate. Soon, the detoxification system gave her the best formula. The best formula was to completely melt the golden needles, producing the least amount of poison and spreading the slowest. Poison doctors not only detoxified, but also used poison to save people. As long as the golden needles in Gu Beiyue's body were melted into poison, then Han Yunxi wouldn't have to remove the needles, but detoxify and expel the poison. Han Yunxi felt that compared to the detoxification system, she was a genius for coming up with such a tactful method. She opened her eyes. Although they were bloodshot, they were still bright. A confident smile flashed across her face. She elegantly stretched out her hand, and a bottle of poison appeared in her hand out of thin air. She didn't know that at this moment, she was like a mysterious and noble magician. At least, in Gu Beiyue's eyes, she was very, very beautiful. Next, it was time for her to do what she was best at. Outside the door, little sat upright in front of the door. His back was ramrod straight, and his arms were crossed over his chest. His tender little face was filled with seriousness, and he looked just like a little door god. Seventh concubine and the housekeeper asked little but he didn't know anything either. They waited by the side, burning with anxiety. If something happened to the emperor's imperial physician in the Han residence, it would be very troublesome. Half an hour later, there was still no movement. Han Yunxi detoxified the poison, and it was her own poison. Did she need half an hour? She only made a small incision on Gu Beiyue's chest and used her unique acupuncture technique to expel all the poison. At this time, the wound had been cleaned, treated with anti-inflammatory and hemostatic herbs, and bandaged. It could be said that it was very successful. At this moment, she was stunned in front of the bed. What happened? More than half of Gu Beiyue's shirt was torn, revealing his perfect chest muscles. It was hard to imagine that a weak man who used to be a pot of medicine, a man who was as gentle as jade and as gentle as the moon, could have such sexy chest muscles. They were full and strong, and filled with masculine strength. Any woman who saw them couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. Han Yunxi had been busy with the treatment and didn't notice Gu Beiyue's good figure. Now, as if she had discovered a shocking secret, she was shocked to her core. Her gaze followed the mesmerizing texture of his body, and she couldn't help but move downwards. She couldn't help but imagine what kind of lean, strong, and handsome man was hiding under the snow-white clothes. Suddenly, at this moment, Gu Beiwe moved. His hand that was hanging by the side slowly clenched. Han Yunxi finally came back to her senses and gave a start. She realized that she had been too distracted. A gentle and warm man paired with a fierce man's body. All right, she admitted that she had been mesmerized. However, she quickly pretended that she hadn't seen anything and quickly moved forward. Gu Beiwe slowly opened his eyes. Before using the poison, Han Yunxi had given him an anesthetic, so he was now awake. Don't move, the wound has just been treated. Han Yunxi seriously said. Gu Beiwe looked at her for a while before saying, Princess Consort, I didn't die. I also thought that you would die, but you are a good person. Good people have good lives. Han Yunxi's words were very serious. She had thought that Gu would take Gu Beiwe's life with a single needle, but who knew that it would be so close? She explained this matter to Gu Beiwe. Gu Beiwe let out a sigh of relief. It must be because of the Princess Consort's good fortune that I was able to avoid this disaster. Han Yunxi couldn't help rolling her eyes. Gu Beiwe, when did you become so good at flattering people? It was clearly me who implicated you. Gu Beiwe gave a shy smile. Princess Consort, I was so scared at that time. When I realized what was going on, I didn't think too much and directly called for help. Isn't this Gu a friend of yours and His Highness? How could it be? Han Yunxi gave a fake smile. Who is his friend? At most, we know each other. Anyway, it's a long story. A complicated look flickered past Gu Beiwe's eyes before he asked, Princess Consort, I heard you say before that these assassination needles belong to the Tang clan. You know about the Tang clan too? Han Yunxi was doubtful. Gu Beiwe was only a doctor, so how could he know about Jianghu matters? The Tang clan's assassination weapons are very famous throughout Cloud Realm continent. I've heard people mention them in Medical City when I was young, Gu Beiwe replied. Han Yunxi nodded, not intending to continue the topic. She casually pulled up a brocade quilt for Gu Beiwe and called for 7th Madam and Little E, to enter. Gu Beiwe finally realized that his upper body was half naked. His ears turned red as he silently pulled the quilt over himself. 7th Madam and Little E, both beamed with joy when they saw that Gu Beiwe was fine. 7th Madam urged Gu Beiwe to stay at the estate for a few days to recover, but Gu Beiwe insisted on returning home. Han Yunxi personally escorted him back to the Gu estate and told the medical attendant how to change his dressing. She was about to leave when Han Yunxi doubled back. Gu Beiwe, today's matter, but before she could finish, Gu Beiwe smiled faintly. Don't worry, Princess Consort. This one won't say a thing. What a smart man. Han Yunxi discovered that she liked this man more and more. She smiled like a flower and nodded before leaving. Gu Beiwe gently stroked the wound on his chest and muttered, Gu, could it be that you're like me, from that place and looking for the poison woman too? Han Yunxi could take poison out of thin air. What kind of skills was that? Could she be the person he was looking for? Chapter 202. By the time Han Yunxi returned to the Duke of Qin's manor, it was already late at night. Seeing that the lights in Long Fei Ye's sleeping quarters were not lit, she assumed that he had gone out again. After pondering for a while, she decided to find a chance to hug Long Fei Ye's thigh in the next few days and beg him to teach her how to use hidden weapons. If she had enough strength, Gu wouldn't have been able to dodge the few moves she had exchanged with Gu. Moreover, after knowing that the Tang clan's hidden weapons were so awesome after being dipped in poison, she was even more impatient to learn. Even if Long Fei Ye rejected her, she would not hesitate and was prepared to shamelessly pester him. It wasn't that she didn't want to lose face, but that her face was worthless, especially in front of that fellow Long Fei Yi. Moreover, face couldn't compare to real skills. Once she learned the Tang clan's hidden weapons, would she still be afraid of not gaining face? Han Yunxi definitely wasn't a tsundere girl. She had a clear understanding of the times and knew when to yield and when to stand tall. As for why Gu was mysteriously investigating the origins of the Tang clan's hidden weapons in her hands, she didn't have the time to think about it. After an entire day of free medical consultation and the false alarm at night, she was truly exhausted. After returning to Leisurely Cloud Pavilion to wash up, Han Yunxi fell asleep as soon as she hit the bed. What she didn't know was that Long Fei Yi was sitting on the roof of Leisurely Cloud Pavilion, waiting for her the entire night. When the lights in the pavilion were extinguished, Long Fei Yi flew down. Like a god of the night descending from the sky, he silently landed in the courtyard. With his hands behind his back, he silently walked out. Very quickly, a hidden guard appeared out of thin air and respectfully followed behind him. Master, as you expected, Gu went to the Han Manor to find esteemed Wang Fei and even injured Imperial Physician Gu. Long Fei Ye's secret guards were not messing around. If it wasn't for Long Fei Ye's orders, they wouldn't dare take a single step away from the Princess Consort. Since they couldn't find out Gu Qishao's origins, Long Fei didn't mind switching tactics and taking the initiative into passivity. Han Yunxi was a simple-minded woman, but Long Fei could tell that Gu Qishao had gotten close to her with ulterior motives. If there was a first time, then there'd be countless more. Gu insists that the Princess Consort's secret weapon is from the Tang sect and even suspects that the Princess Consort is related to the Tang sect. The secret guard reported everything that had happened in the Han family without missing a single word from Gu. Only then did Long Fei Yi stop and mutter to himself, the Tang sect. What is he suspecting? The secret guard respectfully waited, not daring to say anything. Long Fei Yi directly ignored Gu Beiyue and pondered for a long time before taking another step. His expression couldn't be seen in the darkness, but his voice was as cold as the night wind. Continue to stand guard, don't alert the enemy. The night gradually deepened. The extremely tired Han Yunxi should have been sleeping peacefully, but at this moment, her brows were tightly knit as she muttered in her sleep, looking very uneasy. Not long after, she suddenly opened her eyes and found that she was covered in sweat. Her back was completely soaked. She had a nightmare. She lay on her back on the bed, staring at the ceiling with wide eyes. She tried hard to remember everything that had happened in her dream, but it was all fragmented and she couldn't remember anything. She could only vaguely remember that she had walked into a very strange place in her dream. It was both strange and familiar. When she tried to focus her mind to see her surroundings clearly, countless medicinal herbs suddenly flew towards her. They were densely packed together and were very terrifying. Just as she was about to be drowned by the herbs, she woke up. At this moment, her heart was still thumping wildly. Her head was dizzy and her body was weak. She felt like she had overdrawn her energy, and this feeling was exactly what she was familiar with. She didn't rest midway and had continuously used the detoxification system to detoxify several patients. This was exactly what she felt. Han Yunxi seemed to have thought of something and suddenly sat up. She wanted to take out the herbs from the detoxification system, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't take them out. The herbs that had been thrown at her in her dream were the herbs in her detoxification system. They were all boiled medicine packets. How could this be? Han Yunxi tried hard to concentrate on taking out the herbs, but she still couldn't take them out. Was she too tired, or was there something wrong with the detoxification system? What did this nightmare mean? Was that place the detoxification system space? Was the detoxification system messed up? A trace of fear flashed across her heart. Han Yunxi didn't dare to try again. She leaned against the pillow and took a deep breath, telling herself to relax and relax. It must be because she was too tired. As long as she rested well, she would recover. She took a few deep breaths and slowly closed her eyes. But who knew that after she closed her eyes, a line of words would appear in her mind out of thin air. The system is in a state of upgrade. Please rest more. Pfft. Han Yunqi immediately opened her eyes, her face full of disbelief. She never thought that the detoxification system would have such a function. The system was in a state of upgrade, so it was temporarily on strike. She was scared to death. She thought that there was a malfunction. One had to know that without the detoxification system, she wouldn't be able to survive in the crude medical conditions of ancient times. Thinking back, her exhaustion after returning from Medicine City should be related to the detoxification system's upgrade. However, Han Yunqi couldn't understand. How did the detoxification system upgrade for no reason? Could it be that after the upgrade, there would be new functions? Was the nightmare just now a coincidence, or was there another reason? Her divine sense could control the detoxification system, but she had never been able to enter the detoxification system to see the things in the space. The feeling in the nightmare was as if her soul and body were separated, and her soul walked into the space. Just how many surprises or scares had the engineers who developed this system prepared for her? Han Yunqi patted her chest. No matter what, as long as the system didn't go crazy or break down, it wasn't a scare. The upgrade was good, too. She could use this time to rest. As for learning the Tang clan's assassination weapons, she could only postpone it for now. In the following days, Han Yunqi went to the Han family clinic, then to the Gu estate to check on Gu Beiyue's wounds. She spent the rest of her time obediently staying at home. The detoxification system's upgrade really did consume a lot of her energy. By the time she woke up, it was already close to noon. Before, she would go to Grand Concubine Yi's courtyard to sit for a while after meals, but now that she was full, she would slip back to her attic to sleep. The more Zhao Mama looked at her, the more she felt that something was off. Finally, she spoke up at mealtime. Esteemed Wang Fei, you seem to be very sleepy these days. It's spring fatigue. Han Yunqi was almost falling asleep as she ate her lunch. Spring fatigue isn't that serious. Zhao Mama hesitated, then said, Esteemed Wang Fei, how about we call Imperial Physician Li over for a look? It's fine, I'm a doctor myself. Han Yunqi stretched lazily and prepared to leave when Zhao Mama grew anxious. Esteemed Wang Fei, you can't be careless when it comes to things like this. What if you're pregnant? Pfft. Han Yunqi spat out the tea she'd been rinsing her mouth with. She was still trying to figure out how to answer Zhao Mama when a light cough came from the door. Cough cough. If Han Yunqi still had tea in her mouth, she would have spat it out again. That was because the person standing at the door was none other than Long Fei Yi. When did this guy get here? Did he hear anything? Only Long Fei himself knew whether or not he'd heard anything. He walked over expressionlessly as Han Yunqi and Zhao Mama hastily paid their respects. Zhao Mama's eyes flashed shrewdly as she spoke before Han Yunqi could. Your Highness, esteemed Wang Fei has been drowsy recently. From this old servant's experience, it's very possible that she's pregnant. Your Highness should persuade esteemed Wang Fei to summon Imperial Physician Li for a look. Han Yunqi was still feeling uneasy at Zhao Mama's words, but she suddenly felt like laughing. From what she understood, it wasn't just Zhao Mama. Many people in the estate, including Grand Concubine Yi, were concerned about her relationship with Long Fei Yi. Was she favored or not? Han Yunqi laughed in her heart as she glanced innocently at Long Fei Yi, waiting for his reply. No one in the world knew better than him whether she was pregnant or not. But Long Fei Yi didn't hesitate. He elegantly lifted his robes and sat down as if nothing had happened. Then why aren't you hurrying to summon Imperial Physician Li? He asked mildly. Zhao Mama was both surprised and delighted. She was overjoyed. This old servant will go right away, right away. Leaving aside whether she was pregnant or not, His Highness Duke of Qin's words proved that esteemed Wang Fei really had been favored. Otherwise, why would he summon an imperial physician? That was the root of spoiling. Zhao Mama practically flew out while Han Yunxi knitted her brows as she stared at Long Fei Yi on guard. Once imperial physician Li arrived, even if he didn't feel the pregnancy pulse, it still proved that Long Fei Yi really had favored her. That's why he summoned him. Who wouldn't believe it if imperial physician Li spread the news? They were husband and wife to begin with, so there was no such thing as chastity. Once news of this spread, it had confirmed the rumors that she was favored and solidify her position as Qin Wangfei. There were only benefits for her. For no reason at all, why did this guy suddenly want to help her? Han Yunxi couldn't believe it. Long Fei Yi allowed Han Yunxi to stare as he poured himself a cup of tea and drank it indifferently. He had been in the Fu all this time, waiting for this woman to ask him to teach her how to use concealed weapons. Who knew that he would wait for several days? He was very curious. Did this woman give up on learning, or did she really want to wait for Tang Li to teach her? No matter what the reason was, he wouldn't accept it. He poured a cup of tea and pushed it in front of Han Yunxi, indicating for her to stop looking and sit down. You have something to say? Han Yunxi asked suspiciously. All right, she refused to believe that Long Fei would be so kind-hearted and treat her well for no reason without any conditions. Which part of their relationship hadn't been a deal? What do you want to say? Long Fei Yi asked back. Finding an imperial physician to check my pregnancy pulse for no reason, you. Han Yunxi smiled mischievously, then asked again, what do you want to do now? Who knew that Long Fei Yi would leisurely sip his tea before saying coldly, the old matriarchs in the palace and the Fu are all urging me to hold a grandson, so I have to put on an act occasionally. Otherwise, what did you think this prince's motive was? So, Han Yunxi's heart trembled slightly, but she quickly met Long Fei Yi's questioning gaze and laughed. I guess that was also the case. Han Yunxi lowered her head to drink her tea and didn't say anything else. Long Fei Yi looked at her indifferent appearance and his handsome brows unconsciously furrowed. Han Yunxi. He didn't know why he called her name. Han Yunxi raised her head to look at him, her eyes bright and magnanimous. He hesitated for a moment, then said coldly, come to my courtyard tomorrow morning and start learning the Tang sect's hidden weapons. You're not allowed to be late. Ha! Han Yunxi's eyes widened in disbelief. After you've learned it, follow this prince to do things. You're not allowed to be a hindrance. There were conditions for him to take the initiative to teach her. Was this an explanation? After too commanding, you're not allowed, he stood up and left. Her large eyes rolled around a few times, then Han Yunxi suddenly burst out laughing. The high and mighty Duke of Qin actually took the initiative. Chapter 203. Han Yunxi rejoiced that she hadn't begged him. Although face wasn't worth much, at least she'd saved herself once. Last time, she already knew that Long Fei Yi had intentions to cultivate her after killing the poison humans. She was more than willing to accept the condition of not being a burden when she went out to do things. A husband and wife relationship in name would not last long after all. So what if the rumors of her being favored spread like wildfire? Not to mention outsiders, even Granny Zhao, who was by her side, was trying to find out if she was really favored or not. Even those noble madams with status, children, and backing had to fight to keep their positions, to say nothing of her who had nothing at all. How long could such an awkward status support her position in the Duke of Qin's estate and Tianning's imperial clan? On the second day of her marriage, she told herself that she couldn't escape the shackles of fate. The only thing she could do was hold on to Long Fei Yi as her greatest backer. The best way to conquer a man was to conquer his stomach. This saying was pure nonsense. Actually, the best way to conquer a man was to have him conquer you of his own accord. Thinking up to here, Han Yunqi unconsciously licked her lips as the shocking scene from before resurfaced in her mind. He'd said, Han Yunqi, from today onwards, your innocence is your lordship's. Did he count as conquering her? No, he was just claiming ownership of an object. Using the word conquer on a great deity like Long Fei didn't matter whether he was doing it on his own initiative or passively. No matter how Han Yunqi thought about it, it sounded like a fantasy story. She shook her head to block out the thought. She only wanted a place to settle down in the Duke of Qin's estate and let that guy see her value. That way, he wouldn't kick her aside one day when he was in a bad mood. She'd work hard to learn the Tang clan's assassination weapons. Han Yunqi was lost in her thoughts when Zhao Mama happily came to invite her over. Esteemed Wang Fei, Imperial Physician Li is waiting in the courtyard's guest hall. Esteemed Imperial Concubine is there too, so hurry over. As expected, the news had alarmed Grand Concubine Yi. Han Yunqi was extremely sleepy, but she had no choice but to keep her spirits up and follow Zhao Mama. Unexpectedly, it wasn't just Grand Concubine Yi, but Murong Wanru as well. According to etiquette, a married daughter wouldn't easily return to her mother's home, but Grand Concubine Yi doted on Murong Wanru and didn't fuss too much over it. Murong Wanru seemed to be running to the Duke of Qin's estate quite diligently recently. Seeing her arrive, Grand Concubine Yi couldn't wait to rise to welcome her, pulling Han Yunqi carefully to sit down. She was even more cordial than usual. Yunqi, you've been feeling unwell for so long. Why didn't you tell Mufei? What if he broke his bones? Hurry, hurry, let Imperial Physician Li take his pulse. Seeing the joy and anticipation in Grand Concubine Yi's eyes, Han Yunqi knew things were bad. She couldn't help but curse Long Fei Yi in her heart. That guy could trap her in fire and water with a single sentence. As a matter of fact, Murong Wanru was already praising Han Yunqi high up in the air. Sister-in-law, congratulations, congratulations. Mufei's been waiting for news from your stomach for a long time. This time you've finally lived up to expectations. Hearing this, Han Yunqi withdrew her hand with a smile. Since little sister Wanru is so certain, I think it's better to ask Imperial Physician Li to go back. Murong Wanru wasn't tired of flattery, but she was. Imperial Physician Li's hand froze in midair as he didn't know what to do. Sister-in-law, I'm not. Murong Wanru didn't know how to explain, but looked towards Grand Concubine Yi with an aggrieved expression. Mufei, that's not what I meant. I'm just happy for sister-in-law. Grand Concubine Yi was about to speak when Han Yunqi spoke up again. Little sister Wanru doesn't mean that. Could it be that little sister Wanru thinks I'm not pregnant? I'm not. Murong Wanru denied immediately. She hated it to the core. Why was it that every time she met Han Yunqi, she'd be blocked until she couldn't say anything? The Empress Dowager had given her 3 months, but she wanted to make that woman disappear from the Duke of Qin's estate as soon as possible. Then just what do you mean? Han Yunqi asked again. Murong Wanru was completely speechless. She looked pitifully at Grand Concubine Yi, her eyes red as if she'd suffered a great grievance. Grand Concubine Yi glared at Han Yunqi. Yunqi, you can't joke about things like this. Wanru is happy for you. Hurry and have Imperial Physician Li take your pulse. Grand Concubine Yi helped her out of her predicament as she gently patted Murong Wanru's hand. Murong Wanru looked at her as aggrieved as a little daughter-in-law. Although Grand Concubine Yi didn't speak, she held her hand tightly, clearly trying to comfort her. This scene didn't escape Han Yunqi's eyes. She really couldn't understand why a shrewd person like Grand Concubine Yi couldn't see the true nature of a white lotus like Murong Wanru. Wasn't she just an adopted daughter with no blood relations at all? Murong Wanru owed Grand Concubine Yi a favor, not Grand Concubine Yi. With Grand Concubine Yi's personality, how could she indulge her like this? Alright, how long had she and Grand Concubine Yi been on good terms? Murong Wanru had been by her side for over a decade. As soon as Imperial Physician Li took her pulse, both mother and daughter looked over. Grand Concubine Yi was nervous at this moment, while Murong Wanru was in agony. Whether she was pregnant or not, she couldn't accept it. Zhao Mama had said that His Highness Duke of Qin had personally invited Imperial Physician Li, which was enough to prove that this woman had really been taken advantage of. Ever since she was young, His Highness Duke of Qin had always been a godlike existence in her heart. As soon as she thought of someone else enjoying his pleasure and sharing his breasts, her insides trembled. The large guest hall was silent as everyone grew tense. It wasn't clear whether they were infected by the atmosphere, but Han Yunqi couldn't help but wonder. Would the Long Fei Yi allow any woman to bear his child? Abruptly, Imperial Physician Li let go of her hand and interrupted her train of thought. Imperial Physician Li hastily rose to his feet and fearfully bowed. To reply, esteemed Imperial Concubine, esteemed Wang Fei's pulse is, although Imperial Physician Li didn't want to say it, he had to. It shouldn't be a pregnancy pulse. At these words, Grand Concubine Yi immediately stood up. What do you mean by shouldn't be? I want a definite answer. Imperial Physician Li backed up a few steps in fright before bracing himself to give a definite answer. Esteemed Imperial Concubine, this official is certain that esteemed Wang Fei doesn't have a pregnancy pulse. Hearing this, Murong Wanru silently exhaled. No matter what, this was the best result. Grand Concubine Yi didn't speak, but sat back down. Her face that had been full of anticipation and joy immediately fell. She didn't care about Han Yunqi's face at all, but vented her anger on Imperial Physician Li. Useless thing, get out. Han Yunqi knew she'd be disappointed, but she never thought she'd be so obvious. She'd completely ignored her face. Even if she could treat Grand Concubine Yi like her own mother, she was still a daughter-in-law in the end, not her own daughter. What could she hope for? Han Yunqi glanced at Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru holding hands. She didn't feel sad at all. She'd never wanted to curry favor with anyone just to be treated well. She only wanted to live more comfortably in this estate. Now she had a better understanding of certain people and matters. At this moment, Zhao Mama spoke up hastily. Esteemed Imperial Concubine, it's not normal for esteemed Wang Fei to be so sleepy. Let Imperial Physician Li take a look again. Imperial Physician Li was tactful enough to reply. Esteemed Wang Fei's pulse is deep and long. I'm afraid she's overworked herself and lost her vitality. However, as long as she takes care of herself for a month, she'll definitely have a happy ending. Imperial Physician Li's last words were clearly meant for Grand Concubine Yi's ears. Only then did Grand Concubine Yi manage to gather her strength and say mildly, Yunqi, don't run around these days. Take care of your body. Han Yunqi smiled insincerely and nodded. Yes. Imperial Physician Li wrote out a prescription and gave a few more instructions before leaving. Han Yunqi saw that it was a pretty good nourishing prescription, so she accepted it. Mu Fei, the spring hunt is next month. Doesn't that mean sister-in-law won't be able to participate? Murong Wanru had come today precisely for this matter. The spring hunt around the Qingming festival was a grand occasion in Tianing country. If Marquis Pingbei's estate had already received an invitation, then the Duke of Qin's estate would naturally receive one earlier. The spring hunt was an excellent opportunity. The Empress Dowager had only given her 3 months, so she had to make good use of it. Yunxi, next month's spring hunt is your first time participating in it, so you can't miss it. Take good care of your body so you don't delay things when the time comes, Grand Concubine Yi instructed, her interest waning. Yes, Han Yunxi didn't say much, but obediently nodded her head. Murong Wanru kept her company, so Han Yunxi didn't stay long before leaving with Zhao Mama, who comforted her the entire way. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't be sad. Things like this depend on fate. You can't just say it'll happen. Take care of your body first. As long as the green hills remain, there's no need to worry about firewood. Esteemed Wang Fei, walk slower. I heard that the Western Lake doctor has a prescription for medicine that many imperial concubines in the palace have asked for. If it's really effective, this old servant will secretly ask for one for you later. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't suffocate yourself. Your body isn't good to begin with, so suffocating will hurt your body. Things like children should be taken slowly. You and His Highness are both young, so there's no rush. Finally, Han Yunxi stopped walking. She looked at Zhao Mama, feeling both angry and amused. But in the end, she felt warmth. It was great that there were still people in this world who truly cared about her. Not wanting to deceive this kind-hearted Mama, Han Yunxi changed the topic. Mama, tell me about Miss Wanru. What does esteemed Wang Fei want to know? This old servant will definitely tell you everything I know. Zhao Mama was very enthusiastic. How did she get adopted by Grand Concubine Yi? What about her birth parents? Han Yunxi asked seriously. Zhao Mama began to recall. Back then, the late emperor was still alive and didn't have a Duke of Qin's estate. The Crown Prince Consort, who's now esteemed empress, wanted to choose a few court ladies to play with for Princess Chongping. Miss Wanru was one of the candidates, but Grand Concubine Yi happened to bump into her. After giving birth to His Highness Duke of Qin, she couldn't have any more children and always wanted a daughter. It must be fate. She fell in love with Miss Wanru as soon as she saw her and adopted her. She's always been an adopted daughter and never been conferred the title of princess. Later on, the late emperor passed away, so no one did. Han Yunxi listened carefully before asking, then what about her birth parents? Haven't they contacted them in the past few years? Even if they entered the palace as servants, they could still leave regularly to visit their family. Han Yunxi had married into the palace for so long, but she'd never heard of Murong Wanru having any relatives. I heard she was an orphan raised by relatives. We met a few times when she was young, but they all passed away later on, Zhao Mama replied honestly. Han Yunxi nodded thoughtfully, then asked, why didn't they confer her the title of princess back then? If they did, then Murong Wanru's status would be completely different now. Even the people in the estate wouldn't call her Miss Wanru now. Grand Concubine Yi doted on Murong Wanru so much, so there was no reason for that. Zhao Mama didn't understand either, but guessed, perhaps Grand Concubine Yi only wanted to raise her first. Later on, the late emperor passed away and the crown prince took the throne. Grand Concubine Yi couldn't bring up the matter anymore. Han Yunxi felt that something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Chapter 204. At dawn, Han Yunxi arrived at Long Fei Ye's courtyard. She was afraid that she would oversleep, so she asked Granny Zhao to wake her up. She thought that she would come early, but who knew that Long Fei Yi was already making tea in the courtyard. She took a deep breath of the green tea in the fresh morning air, and her whole body suddenly felt refreshed. Compared to a man who drank wine, Han Yunxi preferred a man who drank tea. Today, Long Fei Yi was dressed in a loose white robe. His black hair was casually tied up with a jade hairpin, but he was less cold than usual and more casual. However, he was still in a world of his own. Even when she walked in front of him, Han Yunxi still felt that they were people from two different worlds. "Good morning." She smiled and sat down without being invited. He nodded slightly and poured a cup of tea for her. He didn't talk much and directly asked, "Did you bring the hidden weapons?" In fact, Han Yunxi originally wanted to gossip about the friendship between this guy and Tang Li. Judging from Gu's reaction, it was really not easy to get the Tang sect's hidden weapons. Not only did Tang Li lend her the Pearflower Storm Needles, but he also gave her a lot of hidden weapons. It seemed that he was threatened by Long Feiyi, but in fact, he was giving face to Long Feiyi. However, no matter how good their friendship was, he didn't have to be so generous. Gu suspected that she had something to do with the Tang sect, but she, who knew the truth, suspected that Long Feiyi had something to do with the Tang sect. Seeing Long Feiyi's cold expression, Han Yunxi gave up. After all, it took courage to gossip about this guy. She took out 5 kinds of golden needles and hidden weapons and arranged them on the stone table in a row. They were the plum blossom needle, the finger needle, the acupoint needle, the roe needle, and the mouth needle. "Do you still remember how to use them?" Long Feiyi asked again. Different needles had different usages and required different eyesight, hand strength, and internal energy. Han Yunxi nodded seriously. Her attitude was as proper as that of a primary school student. She repeated what Long Feiyi had taught her that day. Although the other party was taking the initiative to teach her, she couldn't be arrogant just because he was pampered. Of course, the most important thing was that if she was humble, perhaps this fellow would teach her more when he was in a good mood. "Eyesight shouldn't be difficult for you, right?" Long Feiyi asked indifferently. "If you have enough strength, it shouldn't be a problem for you to hit 100% of the time." Han Yunxi was not bragging. Her eyesight was her strength. As a doctor, especially a doctor like her who relied on acupuncture for a living, she could almost find the location of every acupuncture point on a person's body at a glance. She was also very clear about the weaknesses of the human body. Long Feiyi nodded and gently rolled up his sleeves. He placed his hand on the table and assumed a posture of arm wrestling. Han Yunxi was stunned at the sight. "What are you doing?" "To test the potential of your hand strength, hand." Long Feiyi was really a man of few words. Han Yunxi didn't quite understand, but she obediently stretched out her hand. But just as she was about to touch Long Feiyi's large hand, she suddenly slowed down. Arm wrestling, she had to hold his hand. She hesitated and moved closer little by little. The closer she got, the slower she moved. "It's just to test the level of your hand strength." "What are you afraid of?" Long Feiyi asked. Oh. She wasn't afraid, but she was inexplicably nervous. Wasn't it just a handshake? Han Yunxi secretly took a breath. Her small hand finally slowly touched Long Feiyi's large hand. But once she touched it, she instinctively retracted her hand. It was so cold. Long Feiyi's patience was limited. He wanted to urge her, but he suddenly seemed to realize something. His deep eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. He looked at Han Yunxi and asked with interest, "You don't dare?" Did she not dare to touch, or did she not dare to try? His words were ambiguous and provocative. The speaker had his own meaning, and the listener had their own understanding. It was really thought-provoking. Of course, in Han Yunxi's understanding, the word ambiguous did not exist in Long Feiyi's world. She only took it as a provocation from Long Feiyi. She despised herself in her heart. She wasn't a love-struck fool, so why did she always think in the wrong direction when facing this guy? Look at how magnanimous he was. What was her mind full of? If he knew what she was thinking, she would definitely be disgusted. Coughing lightly, Han Yunxi calmed down and smiled. "Your Highness, don't let me win." Long Feiyi's hand was still there. He raised his eyebrows, indicating that he wouldn't. Han Yunqi reached out her hand again. This time, her movements were nimble, and she directly grabbed Long Fei Ye's large hand. His hand was naturally cold, and because of holding a sword for many years, it was hard and rough. Her hand was soft, her skin was creamy, and as gentle as water. Climbing up like this, the soft touch made Long Fei Yi feel very comfortable. A strong desire to possess arose in him. Gradually, his originally deep eyes became abnormally deep. His hand was long, and her hand was short. Compared to supporting herself on the table, there was a large difference. Han Yunqi's fingers barely managed to hold on to his hand, but she didn't hold it tightly. She hesitated for a moment, and her small hand actually carefully climbed up bit by bit. Her warm palm gently rubbed against his cold palm. She only wanted to hold it a little higher, but she didn't know that her actions were a great provocation to the self-control of the man in front of her. The soft rubbing felt like it was tickling, like it was teasing, numbing, and a warm current silently surged up from his abdomen. Long Fei Yi was impulsive for the first time in his life. His large hand suddenly wrapped around Han Yunqi's small hand, and then he held it tightly. Han Yunqi was shocked. She suddenly raised her head and met Long Fei Ye's deep eyes. 4 eyes met. Long Fei Ye's hand strength became stronger, as if he was going to pull Han Yunqi over. However, at this moment, Han Yunqi couldn't help but shout, "It hurts." He was holding it so tightly that her bones were about to be crushed. She really couldn't take it anymore. They hadn't even started arm wrestling, and she already couldn't take it. How strong was this guy's hand strength? Han Yunqi's cry of, "It hurts," immediately pulled Long Fei Yi back from the brink of losing control. His deep eyes suddenly became sharp, and he immediately let go of Han Yunqi's hand. Han Yunqi felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders, but she vaguely felt a sense of emptiness that she couldn't explain. She glanced at Long Fei Yi and realized that his expression was especially solemn. It really hurts a little. Don't hold it so tightly. Let me try breaking it," she said timidly, thinking that he was disappointed. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi said, "There's no need. No matter how much you train, it'll be useless. You won't be able to gain much strength." "What?" Han Yunqi was shocked. She asked anxiously, But I haven't tried it yet, right? If you can't even withstand this kind of grip, what else can you hope for?" Long Fei Yi said heartlessly. But. Han Yunqi was anxious. She didn't know anything about martial arts, and she didn't know how to train arm strength. Was it really like what Long Fei Yi said? Long Fei Yi stood up, and Han Yunqi hurriedly stood up as well. She asked, "Do you still have inner strength? Can I practice inner strength? Teach me inner strength." "It's the same principle." "I won't teach you," Long Fei Yi said as he turned to leave. "Nanny." Han Yunqi stood rooted to the ground, dumbfounded. She was so immersed in shock that she didn't notice how hurriedly Long Fei Yi left, as if he was escaping. Wasn't this kind of blow too sudden? She only felt that she had been completely rejected in an instant. One had to know that she was full of expectations and humbly and seriously wanted to learn. She looked at her own hands in a daze. Although she didn't understand, she knew that the strength of the hands and feet and inner strength were the most basic things to learn martial arts. If she couldn't practice inner strength, then she couldn't practice inner strength. So, was she a martial arts waste? Did she have to be so unlucky? Han Yunqi wasn't willing to give up. She hurriedly chased after him, but unfortunately, she couldn't find Long Fei Yi anywhere. In the next few days, Long Fei Yi didn't appear. Chu Shifeng narrowly avoided falling over as his expression turned stiff. So she was going to test him. Han Yunqi waved her hand and told him to hurry and keep his distance. She tried the pear blossom rain needles before, so this pear blossom teardrop rain shouldn't disappoint her too much. Chapter 205. Although this pear blossom teardrop rain was far inferior to the pear blossom rain needles, Chu Shifeng wasn't clear on the exact speed and strength of the needles. He only knew that a weapon personally made by Tang Li, the young head of the Tang clan, couldn't be simple. Chu Shifeng stood a distance away, completely on guard. Han Yunqi was still slowly loading the needles one by one, in no rush. But halfway through, she suddenly stopped and pressed a switch. In a flash, 3 needles shot out at the same time towards Chu Shifeng like a bolt of lightning. Fortunately, Chu Shifeng had long been on guard and dodged to the side. But right after that, another needle flew towards his side. He bent backwards to dodge again, but all 3 needles pierced through his crotch at the same time to aim for the back of his head. Of course, as Long Fei's personal bodyguard and most capable assistant, Chu Shifeng had a few tricks up his sleeve. With a backflip, he rose into the air. Unexpectedly. At the same time, the 3 needles were already waiting for him. Their strength and speed made it hard for him to dodge. Fuck, Chu Shifeng cursed. He never expected Han Yunqi to know exactly where he was going to dodge. He'd eavesdropped on His Highness and Tang Li's conversation and learned that this woman was a useless martial artist. That was why His Highness refused to teach her assassination weapons and told Tang Li to never teach her, as long as he made her a weapon that could make up for her lack of strength and speed. However, based on her intelligence and talent, was she really a good-for-nothing? While Chu Shifeng was lost in thought, a dozen or so needles shot out like a rain of needles. They surrounded him and surged towards him. Now Chu Shifeng had no way of dodging, so he could only meet them head-on. He swept his sword horizontally and knocked down half of the needles, then turned sideways and slashed down with his sword. Clang, clang, clang. He swept away the rest of the needles. Seeing this, Han Yunqi wasn't disappointed at all. In fact, she was very satisfied. It was already praiseworthy that this weapon had forced Chu Shifeng to make a move. If it was used against ordinary guards or assassins, it should be enough to defend itself. In terms of strength and speed, she was very satisfied. As for how far this hidden weapon could reach, it would all depend on her hard work in the future. Han Yunqi stopped. After confirming that she'd really stopped, Chu Shifeng landed and praised, esteemed Wang Fei's eyesight doesn't lose to martial arts practitioners. Even with a weapon in hand, if one didn't have good eyesight, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Han Yunqi felt as if she had found a treasure. She was very happy. Judging from the strength and speed of this treasure, even if her hands were not crippled, she might not be able to practice it in a short time. If there was something to replace it, why should she practice hard? If this were to happen in modern times, it would be called mechanization. With this thought in mind, Han Yunqi no longer doubted that she was a useless martial artist. Where's His Highness? It had been days since she'd seen that guy, but he didn't dislike her. Instead, he'd given her such a good thing. He was much more considerate than she imagined, so it was necessary to thank him in person. This subordinate isn't sure either. He should be back in a few days for the spring hunt. Chu Shifeng really wasn't sure. He felt that His Highness Duke of Qin had been acting strange recently, but he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Is he busy with the Duke of Kang's affairs? Has he made a move? Han Yunqi asked offhandedly. Last time, Long Fei had destroyed his entire mountain village. With that guy's personality, how could he not retaliate? Chu Shifeng still didn't understand why His Highness trusted this woman so much that he'd given her the perplexing butterfly illusion to study. After some hesitation, he shook his head and said he wasn't sure. Han Yunqi was a smart person. Seeing Chu Shifeng's reaction, she didn't pursue the matter. She faintly sensed that Long Fei Yi had some sort of secret, but Chu Shifeng clearly didn't see her as one of his own. But this was fine too. She didn't want to know too many secrets. The more she knew, the more dangerous it'd be. The spring hunt was approaching, so she'd see Long Fei Yi sooner or later. After Chu Shifeng left, Han Yunxi headed for the study. She had to carefully study the pear blossom teardrop rain and use it to its fullest potential. At this moment, Long Fei Yi finally stood up from his seat on the roof. His eyes were as cold and aloof as ever, like he was inspecting a subordinate. He looked at Han Yunxi from a lofty position. He only wanted to train this woman into his personal poisons master, that's all. But there was a hint of domineering determination in his gaze that he didn't even notice. Even after Han Yunxi entered the room, he was still staring at her. It was a long time before he turned to leave. Chu Shifeng assumed that he'd be dragged here to be a target practice again, but Han Yunxi spent the next few days holed up in her study studying the pear blossom teardrop rain. She didn't look for him at all. He really didn't understand why such a perfect assassination weapon was worth studying. Shouldn't she practice more if she wanted to use it well? Only Han Yunxi herself knew what she was doing in her study. It was worth mentioning that although the detox system was still in a state of upgrade, Han Yunxi's mental state was gradually recovering. She guessed that the detox system would give her a pleasant surprise very soon. Time passed in the blink of an eye. The day of the spring hunt had arrived. The spring hunt was for hunting, the summer hunt for sprouts, the autumn hunt for stalks, and the winter hunt for hunts. Although the spring hunt was a grand event in Tianing country, it wasn't as grand as the autumn hunt. It wasn't held in the hunting grounds, but year after year, depending on the circumstances. However, it was always held in a place with dense fields of fertile farmland. On one hand, it helped the common people hunt down beasts that trampled on their crops. On the other, it was a chance for the nobles and aristocrats to stretch their limbs and get rid of their laziness after winter. Of course, these were all high-sounding words. Be it for men or women, the spring hunt was a social field. Most of the people who couldn't see each other and couldn't make an appointment with each other could meet each other at the spring hunt. They could even become comrades who fought side by side with each other. Finding someone was simply for the sake of doing business. As long as they met the person and struck up a conversation, they wouldn't have to worry about not getting things done. Emperor Tianhui usually didn't attend the spring hunt. For the past few years, the crown prince had been bedridden, so His Highness Duke of Qin had been in charge of the hunt. Now that the crown prince had recovered from his illness, Emperor Tianhui naturally pushed him forward. Long Fei Yi didn't mind and was more than happy to be idle. However, the crown prince was a clever man. He personally delivered the first invitation letter to the Duke of Qin's estate. Compared to his imperial father, he was even more unwilling to make an enemy out of this imperial Qin uncle. Moreover, His Highness Crown Prince had plenty of things to do during this year's spring hunt, so imperial Qin uncle's attendance was very important to him. This year's spring hunt was to be held in Biais County, northwest of the capital. The fertile fields there stretched as far as the eye could see, making it the largest granary of Tianing's capital city. If they set off early the next morning, they'd arrive by nightfall at the earliest. The journey was long and the entourage was huge. Crown Prince Long Tianma had long arrived at Biais County ahead of time to personally make arrangements. There was no such thing as a large entourage, but the invited guests only needed to arrive at the appointed time. Most people would form their own groups of 2s and 3s. Leaving aside Long Fei Yi, even Grand Concubine Yi refused to form a group with anyone else. The Duke of Qin's estate was incomparably honorable, so it wasn't easy to climb up to them. Tonight, a disappointed Grand Concubine Yi sought out Han Yunxi for tea for the first time since she'd missed her pregnancy pulse. "Are your bones feeling better?" Grand Concubine Yi asked with concern. "Thanks to Mu Fei's concern, they're much better," Han Yunxi's tone was more polite now. Faye still hasn't come back. You can come with my carriage and make preparations. We'll set off early tomorrow morning. Hearing this, Han Yunxi grew doubtful. Early in the morning, Han Yunxi heard Xiao Mama say that even though His Highness Duke of Qin was in charge of the spring hunt in the past, the Duke of Qin's carriage would always set off late and arrive very late. Why was it so early this year? Mu Fei, why don't we wait a little later and wait for His Highness? Han Yunxi wondered if Long Fei Yi would return later. Perhaps he'd be back early tomorrow morning. Chu Shifeng had said she'd see him during the spring hunt, hadn't he? We're not waiting anymore. He rides fast, so neither of us can keep up with him. Go make preparations and don't wake up late tomorrow. Hearing Grand Concubine Yi's commanding tone, Han Yunxi was too lazy to coax her any further. She simply nodded and left. Long Fei Yi still didn't show up that night. Early in the morning, Han Yunxi glanced back at his sleeping quarters before leaving the courtyard, listless the entire way. She didn't even know what she was feeling down about. But as soon as she reached the gates, she perked up. Besides Grand Concubine Yi's luxurious carriage, there were 5 or 6 others from Marquis Pingbei's estate, the Ministry of Appointments officials, and the Duke's estate. All 3 families, young and old, were waiting by the sides. As soon as they saw Han Yunxi emerge, they all came forward to pay their respects. What kind of rhythm was this? Who told them to come? Han Yunxi was puzzled when Murong Wanru came out with Grand Concubine Yi by her arm. Han Yunxi was surprised. When did Murong Wanru come? She couldn't have stayed at the estate last night, right? Grand Concubine Yi didn't say a word last night. The 3 families grew even more respectful at the sight of Grand Concubine Yi. To be able to travel with esteemed imperial concubine is the fortune of 3 lifetimes, the old Guogong chuckled. The old Guogong held a high position and was an important official of 2 dynasties. But standing under the eaves of the Duke of Qin's estate still made him seem shorter. It was only natural for him to flatter Grand Concubine Yi. But the Ministry of Appointments official, His Excellency Su, only laughed. Isn't this all thanks to the young madam's good fortune? The young madam was none other than the wife of Marquis Pingbei's estate's Zhangsun Che, Murong Wanru. His Excellency Su's words didn't sound wrong, but he'd lost his sense of propriety. The Duke's estate was flattering Grand Concubine Yi, but he didn't agree. Instead, he shifted the topic to Murong Wanru. Han Yunxi watched and listened from the sidelines, puzzled. But Grand Concubine Yi didn't get angry, but was very happy. She chuckled and said, this is the first time I've heard the words young madam. It's so awkward. I still haven't recovered from the shock. My family's Wanru's already married off. Esteemed imperial concubine, Marquis Pingbei's estate has stolen someone's beloved. They should be punished, they should be punished. Marquis Pingbei's wife teased. TSK, since when could a trifling Marquis Pingbei's wife joke around with Grand Concubine Yi? Now Han Yunxi understood. As it turned out, these people had been friends for a long time. Grand Concubine Yi could even set aside her status to chat and laugh with them. In that case, what was so strange about traveling with these 3 families? Without a doubt, Murong Wanru had facilitated all of this. Han Yunxi had been busy for the past 2 months, so she hadn't paid much attention to Grand Concubine Yi. It looked like Murong Wanru had put in a lot of effort despite being married off. But there was one thing that Han Yunxi couldn't figure out. Chapter 206. Han Yunxi couldn't figure out anything else but Grand Concubine Yi's attitude. Grand Concubine Yi was famous for her high aspirations in the imperial clan. She was even more unyielding than the Empress Dowager. Just what was the reason for her to be willing to lower herself for Murong Wanru's sake? After all, Murong Wanru's marriage was a disgrace in and of itself. Grand Concubine Yi was such a prideful person that she could act as if nothing had happened in such a short time. It was inconceivable that Marquis Pingbei's estate would become her in-laws. Wasn't this sacrifice too great? The Ministry of Appointments official had real power and the Duke's estate held a high position. Now they all had to give face to Marquis Pingbei's estate. Grand Concubine Yi really didn't hesitate to lower herself for the sake of elevating Marquis Pingbei's estate. Leaving aside the fact that Grand Concubine Yi and Marquis Pingbei's estate had gotten closer over the past few months, today's spring hunt was enough to send news of these three families traveling with the Duke of Qin's estate. Their statuses in the capital would soar as well. It'd also cause a change in the social circles of the capital. Grand Concubine Yi had done all this for Murong Wanru's sake, but had she asked His Highness Duke of Qin for permission? His Highness Duke of Qin had already gotten Zhang Sun Che a position in the Ministry of Appointments. Wasn't that enough? The Duke of Qin's estate was respected only because of Long Fei Ye's existence. Without him, Grand Concubine Yi would only be a has-been imperial concubine no matter how high her aspirations were. Lowering her own son's status for the sake of a disappointing foster daughter wasn't something someone like Grand Concubine Yi would do. Han Yunxi couldn't figure it out no matter how much she thought about it. She faintly felt that Grand Concubine Yi had doted on Murong Wanru even more after her marriage. Han Yunxi was still knitting her brows when they boarded the carriage. Murong Wanru didn't sit in Marquis Pingbei's carriage, but took Grand Concubine Yi's hand to sit by her side. But Long Fei Yi was equally puzzled. He watched the departing carriages and asked coldly, why are they leaving early this year? In the past years, he'd never left with Grand Concubine Yi, but she'd always leave after lunch. Gui Mama from Imperial Concubine Dowager's courtyard said that it was Imperial Concubine Dowager's idea. She said that there would be plenty of time if they left early and they would be able to enjoy the scenery on the way. He also said that in order to avoid other carriages, he chose the Wang family ravine road, which is more remote. The shadow guard reported in a low voice. Han Yunxi's idea. To look at the scenery. This woman was in a good mood, but had she thought about her safety? Long Fei Ye's eyes flickered with displeasure, but he didn't ask any questions. Cold, he said, tell Chu Shifeng to act according to plan. Yes. The secret guard accepted the order and left. However, he was puzzled in his heart. Why didn't His Highness have any opinion about Imperial Concubine Dowager traveling with the other three families? The carriage sped along and soon left the capital city. The carriage leading the way was in the lead, followed by Grand Concubine Yi's carriage, while the other three families followed closely behind. The entire way, Murong Wanru kept Grand Concubine Yi company and chatted. As expected of a mother and daughter who'd been together for years, Murong Wanru could always amuse Grand Concubine Yi with a single sentence. Topic after topic, it seemed like they'd never run out. This made it impossible for Han Yunxi, who was nestled on one side, to fall asleep. Moreover, Han Yunxi wasn't familiar with their topics, so she couldn't get a word in edgewise. She was too lazy to join in on the fun, so she simply leaned against the window to enjoy the scenery. But gradually, Han Yunxi felt that something was off. Why did the carriage seem more and more desolate? She turned back and asked, Mufei, aren't we taking the main road? There was a main road from the capital city to Bi's county that was smooth and easy to travel on. Although Han Yunxi didn't know the road, she could tell from her surroundings that it wasn't a main road at all. Grand Concubine Yi was so engrossed in conversation that she didn't hear Han Yunxi's question clearly. What? She asked offhandedly. Mufei, did we go the wrong way? What is this place? Han Yunxi asked seriously. Only then did Grand Concubine Yi grow suspicious. She was about to look out the window when the carriage abruptly stopped. Ah! Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru shrieked at the same time as they fell forward. Fortunately, Han Yunshi reacted quickly enough to press one hand against the window while the other grabbed Grand Concubine Yi's hand. Grand Concubine Yi steadied herself, but Murong Wanru slammed into the door frame. Before they could recover their wits, a guard's voice came from outside. "There's an assassin. Protect the master's well." "Assassin? Heavens!" Grand Concubine Yi shrieked, her face draining of color as she shrank back. It wasn't that she wasn't calm, but that she'd rarely encountered danger in her life. Murong Wanru's eyes flashed coldly as she shrank back to Grand Concubine Yi's side. In a panic, she asked, "Mufei, what do we do? How could there be an assassin? How could Grand Concubine Yi know that mother and daughter were soon hugging each other?" At this moment, the sounds of fighting outside grew louder and louder. The clanging of weapons against each other was enough to shake people to their core. Judging by the sounds, there were plenty of assassins. "Wanru, take good care of Mufei." Han Yunshi made a prompt decision and left these words behind before getting off the carriage. Seeing this, Murong Wanru was both surprised and delighted. Han Yunshi, Han Yunshi. I never thought you'd dare to get off the carriage. Since you're here, things will be easier. Thinking up to here, she hugged the terrified Grand Concubine Yi tighter while her other hand silently fumbled for the 3 needles in her sleeve, waiting for a chance to act. Han Yunshi had no idea what was going on inside the carriage. Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru were people of the same mind, so leaving them there was the safest option. As soon as she got off the carriage, she saw the guards protecting it while fighting against the black-robed assassins. The carriages behind them were in the same situation. She stood on one side and didn't make a move, cold as she watched the movements of the black-robed assassins. Why didn't the carriage take the main road instead of this remote place? Even if it was a normal road, who in the capital would have the guts to hijack the Duke of Qin's carriage? Were these black-robed assassins here to rob, or to target someone in the carriage? Han Yunshi immediately thought of Northern Li's Duke of Kong. But these black-robed assassins weren't high-level experts. They'd been fighting with the guards for so long without a clear winner. Northern Li's Duke of Kong couldn't have such weak subordinates, right? While Han Yunshi was lost in thought, a black-robed assassin suddenly broke through the guard's line of defense and flew towards the carriage with a sword in hand. Han Yunshi's eyes turned cold as she raised her hand to aim. A needle flew out from her wrist and accurately hit the assassin between his eyebrows. Seeing this, the guards on the side gave a start while the black-robed assassins all looked over. Of course, it was only for a split second before they started fighting again. Han Yunshi's lips rose to a faint smile. She casually turned around and shot out a needle to kill the assassin who'd attacked her from behind. Against a high-level expert like Chu Shifeng, she had to fight seriously and honestly. But against these black-robed assassins, she felt like she could go all out and play. It was rare for her to have a chance to fight, and there were so many of them. Han Yunshi's interest was piqued. She gradually distanced herself from the carriage and joined the fight. Seeing her approach, the black-robed assassins all rushed at her, but her figure was as agile as a flying goose. Her every movement was elegant and graceful, but amidst this elegance, she silently shot out needle after needle, knocking down the black-robed assassins one by one. Seeing this, the guards all stopped in unison. The black-robed assassins stopped surrounding the carriage, but all 20 or so of them gathered around Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi wasn't afraid at all. The more she played, the happier she became. She dodged the black-robed assassin's swords as she shot out needles. Sometimes she leaned back, sometimes she leaned forward, sometimes she leaned sideways, sometimes she spun around. Her movements grew smoother and smoother until they were like moving clouds and flowing water. It was as if she was performing a moving dance. On the side, Chu Shifeng's mouth twitched at the sight. He didn't know how to evaluate this woman and couldn't help but wonder if she was really a good-for-nothing. Behind him, Long Fei Yi was staring fixedly as well, a doting smile on his cold lips. He was here to ambush Northern Li's Duke of Kong, but didn't expect to run into these assassins. Of course, he wasn't planning to make a move himself. The people in the other carriages didn't dare to come out, while the guards all became spectators. While Han Yunxi was having fun, Grand Concubine Yi was on the brink of life and death. Inside the carriage, Grand Concubine Yi was curled up in a ball, her mouth gagged. Her eyes were wide as she stared at Murong Wanru in disbelief, her face paler than a corpse's. This daughter who'd been holding her hand and joking with her just a moment ago, now wanted to kill her. The daughter she'd doted on for over a decade, the one she'd thought of with all her heart, actually wanted to kill her. Why? Why was this? Grand Concubine Yi couldn't believe what she was seeing with her own eyes. Even if it was a dream, she couldn't believe she'd have such a nightmare. She was always timid, but now her shock far surpassed her fear. No, she couldn't accept this reality. Murong Wanru allowed her to look as she calmly revealed 3 sharp golden needles, counting them one by one with great interest. A cold, almost perverted smile gradually appeared on her delicate, flowery face. Her tone was light and slow, but it was enough to make people tremble. Mu Fei, did you know? A doctor once told me that as long as a person's Mingkong acupuncture point 3 ruthless needles, it's guaranteed that they'll die. At these words, Grand Concubine Yi was finally afraid. Her fear surpassed her shock as the rims of her eyes turned red. Her gaze flitted between Murong Wanru's face and the needles as she shook her head in fear. She made sobbing sounds, her eyes so red they seemed to be filled with tears. Why are you looking at me like that, Mu Fei? Murong Wanru's voice was innocent and harmless. Mu Fei. Why are you crying? Just think about it, I've called you Mu Fei for so many years. Speaking up to hear, her voice grew sharp as she asked, did I call you Mu Fei for nothing? As soon as she finished speaking, she drew closer and placed the needles on the acupuncture point on Grand Concubine Yi's neck. The cold, sharp touch made Grand Concubine Yi tremble as all the hairs on her body stood on end. She could even feel the blood flowing out, slowly trickling down her neck. Sob, sob. Sob. She didn't dare to shake her head, but kept making anxious sobs that grew louder and louder. Murong Wanru understood her well enough to get very, very close. With great patience, she asked, what do you want to say? Say that you adopted me and I repay kindness with enmity. Say that you treat me well and I don't know how to be grateful. Grand Concubine Yi wanted to shake her head, but she didn't dare to move. Murong Wanru laughed disdainfully. Grand Concubine Yi, you've always thought yourself infallible and high above everyone else. Do you know how tiring it was for me to live by your side all these years? Chapter 207. Murong Wanru lost all sense of reason as soon as she gave vent. Or rather, she'd been irrational from the moment she decided to kill Grand Concubine Yi. Looking at Grand Concubine Yi's terrified expression, she completely forgot that she'd still be a nameless court lady if it wasn't for Grand Concubine Yi. Perhaps she'd even be buried with Princess Chongping. All she could think about now was how Grand Concubine Yi hadn't done her best to help her, protect her, or make her a concubine of the Duke of Qin. This was probably the so-called, when you raise rice and hate it when you raise it. Ever since I was young, I've had to do my best to guess at your intentions and serve you carefully, afraid that you'd send me back to the palace if you weren't happy. Why did I do all this? Grand Concubine Yi, 7 years ago you told me you were going to marry me off to the Duke of Qin. What happened in the end? You married me off to that coward Zhang Sun Che. Why are you so good to Han Yunxi? Although I'm not your biological daughter, I've served you for so many years. Can't I compare to a single Hanyunshi? Tell me. The more Murong Wanru spoke, the angrier she got. Grand Concubine Yi's tears flowed even more violently. Even with the needle at her neck, she shook her head to deny everything Murong Wanru said. It wasn't like that. She treated Wanru well with all her heart these past few years, so why would Wanru think this way? In her heart, Wanru was much more important than Han Yunshi. No matter how well Han Yunshi did, she was still an outsider. What, did I say something wrong? Murong Wanru laughed coldly. In any case, you're about to lose your life, so I might as well tell you. I was the one who spread the news of Han Yunshi's medical skills. I was also the one who instigated Lady Su to cause a ruckus at the gates. And also, speaking up to here, Murong Wanru seemed to recall something as her gaze turned ruthless. And also, the plum blossom meet was arranged by me and Princess Chongping. Zhang Sunche should have violated Han Yunshi, not me, not me. By the end, Murong Wanru was close to Grand Concubine Yi's face and growled, "It shouldn't have been me." As soon as she finished speaking, the needle in her hand abruptly pierced into Grand Concubine Yi's neck before digging deeper. Woo woo woo, woo woo, Grand Concubine Yi was very surprised. She never expected Murong Wanru to be the one behind all this. She looked at Murong Wanru with teary eyes, but Murong Wanru had already sunk into a crazed state. She looked at her emotionlessly, as if admiring her. Her neck hurt so much. More blood was flowing out. She was going to die. She would definitely die. But nobody knew that Grand Concubine Yi's heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Even the pain in her neck couldn't compare to the pain in her heart. No, Wanru can't kill her. Anyone in the world can kill her except Wanru. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Back then, no one who saw the child in swaddling clothes would suspect that he wasn't a blood relative of the imperial clan. Fei won the late emperor's favor and even had the potential to replace the crown prince. Unfortunately, the late emperor passed away early, or else today's world would be her Duke of Qin's. In the end, Wanru was still her own flesh and blood. In the end, she seized the chance to send her 6-year-old daughter into the palace, thinking of her as an adopted daughter. All those years she was scared witless and didn't ask for a title for Wanru. As long as she could stay by her side, it was fine. She even planned to make Wanru the Duke of Qin's concubine when she grew up. That way, she could stay at the Duke of Qin's estate and accompany her for the rest of her life. This could count as her compensation for Wanru. When Han Yunshi brought up Wanru's marriage, she didn't seem to object, but she already had an idea in her heart. Unfortunately, the events at the Plum Blossom meet had come too suddenly and caused too much of a ruckus. There was no way to salvage the situation. She had no choice but to marry Wanru off. Even if she was married off, she would do her best to seek a better future for Wanru. If it wasn't for this guilt and this secret, how could she lower herself to give face to Marquis Pingbei's estate for a mere adopted daughter? All her thoughts were on her daughter, but in the end, all she got in return was deep resentment and hatred. Murong Wanru actually wanted to kill her. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if she really was an adopted daughter, she shouldn't bite the hand that fed her. Grand Concubine Yi's heart died at the sight of the gaping Murong Wanru. Her tears continued to flow as she shook her head, feeling both physically and mentally exhausted. She didn't know what to say. Murong Wanru gradually recovered from her shock. Her hands went limp as the 3 needles fell to the ground. What did you say? Grand Concubine Yi wept silently, too weak to speak. I'm your biological daughter. Your biological daughter. Murong Wanru's shock was indescribable. Suddenly, she wrapped her hands around Grand Concubine Yi's neck and raged, "You're lying. You made up a lie just to live. Do you take me for an idiot? No, you're my daughter, Wanru. I didn't lie to you. The mama who delivered you was. Grand Concubine Yi was almost out of breath from the choking. Wanru, you should have been a princess. It was Mufei who let you down. Wanru, you. At the word princess, Murong Wanru abruptly stopped. Princess. She was supposed to be a princess. She was supposed to be of the same generation as Emperor Tianhui. She was supposed to be respected. But over the past few years, she'd suffered countless supercilious looks from the imperial clan and scorching satires. She was only an adopted daughter. Even the servants of the Duke of Qin's estate called her Miss Wanru. Shock, anger, resentment, and unwillingness filled Murong Wanru's heart. She kept her hands around Grand Concubine Yi's neck, but didn't use any more strength. She stood there stunned. Everything had happened so suddenly that she didn't know what to do. At the same time, another person was stunned by the news. This person was none other than Han Yunxi. She had long boarded the carriage and was right outside the carriage door, one hand still holding the curtains. She almost lifted the curtain, but her hand was still stiff from hearing the conversation inside. She didn't have as many emotions as Murong Wanru, but the only thought in her mind was that if she really was Grand Concubine Yi's daughter, then wouldn't that mean Long Fei Yi was? Grand Concubine Yi only had one son in her entire life. After giving birth, she couldn't bear any more children. Everyone knew this fact. Rather than saying that Murong Wanru's identity had shocked Han Yunxi, it was more accurate to say that Long Fei Yi's identity had shaken her to her core. At this moment, the guards were taking care of the assassins' corpses. A few of the survivors had been tied up, while the people in the carriage behind them were disembarking one after another. Zhang Sun-che and Marquis Pingbei hurried over. Han Yunxi was still frozen in front of the carriage door, unable to recover her senses. She really didn't want to know such a huge secret. As for Long Fei Yi, he had no idea what was going on inside the carriage either. He only felt that Han Yunxi was acting strange. Your Highness, what's esteemed Wang Fei doing? Chu Shifeng asked in a low voice. But as soon as he spoke, multiple assassination weapons suddenly flew out from the grass opposite them, heading straight for Han Yunxi. They're finally here. Long Fei Yi said coldly as he leapt into the air, his speed as fast as lightning. He swept aside the weapons with his sword and headed straight for the grass. But this was actually a plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Northern Li's Duke of Kong, Jun Yixia, flew out from the other side, his black eyes wild and wicked. As soon as he drew close to Han Yunxi, he reached out a hand to grab her. Nobody expected an assassin to show up. Han Yunxi never expected Jun Yixia to show up as well. Without a second thought, she lifted the carriage curtains and hid inside. Chapter 208. As soon as Han Yunxi rolled inside, Murong Wanru and Grand Concubine Yi both jumped in fright. Realizing the situation outside, Murong Wanru quickly let go of Grand Concubine Yi's neck. Heavens, what did Han Yunxi see? Grand Concubine Yi was frightened as well. Heavens, what did Han Yunxi hear? Han Yunxi heard and saw everything, but right now she didn't care who was whose daughter, who wanted to kill whom, or who wanted to frame whom. She didn't even have time to catch her breath, but gripped the weapons on her wrist tightly as she stared at the carriage curtains, on guard against Jun Yixia at all times. But suddenly, the carriage seemed to have been kicked viciously as it swerved to the right. Heaven knows what was happening outside. Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru both cried out in alarm. Han Yunxi was caught off guard as well and followed the carriage to the right, her back slamming hard against the ground. So painful. She was about to climb to her feet when Murong Wanru and Grand Concubine Yi both slammed into her, clumsily piling on top of her like a human pyramid. Oh no! So painful. She felt like she was going to vomit out her organs from the impact. Han Yunxi wanted to curse at them, but a foot suddenly kicked through the carriage window on the left, kicking through the curtains to land on top of Murong Wanru. Ah! Murong Wanru shrieked, but Han Yunxi's sharp eyes recognized the foot as Jun Xie's. It was a pair of black, gold-threaded boots with a slight curve at the tip, a symbol of Northern Li's nobility. Here's my chance. Han Yunxi ignored the pain and reached out her hand, aiming for the acupuncture point on the leg. But before she could release the needle, the foot retracted back. Through the small window, she saw Long Fei Yi and Jun Xie both stepping on the carriage. The two of them were fighting in close combat. Both of them were on all fours, constantly changing their footsteps and flashing past the window from time to time. For a moment, Han Yunxi did not have a chance to attack. The detoxification system was in the process of upgrading. Han Yunxi was trapped underneath and did not know whether Jun Xie had used poison or not. She also could not warn Long Fei Yi. If Jun Xie didn't use poison, Long Fei Yi could easily deal with him. However, if Jun Xie used poison, she didn't know how long Long Fei Yi could last. She threw caution to the wind and didn't want to think too much. She just stared at the small window and waited for Jun Xie to come to her door. Sure enough, Jun Xie's 2 feet stepped on the window very quickly. Cough cough, this situation did not look very elegant from below, but Han Yunxi really wanted to say that this scene was too intoxicating. Big drug lord, right? I'll let you have a taste of this lady's super strong anesthetic from the modern era. She didn't shut herself in the study to study the pear blossom teardrop rain for nothing. She had 39 golden needles in her hand. Some were non-poisonous, some were poisonous, and the poisonous ones were divided into several types. She narrowed her eyes and activated the mechanism without hesitation. It wasn't just one needle, but several golden needles shot out at the same time towards Jun Xie's crotch. The result was very much worth looking forward to. But no one expected that at the same time Han Yunxi shot out the needles, Murong Wanru, who was at the top, suddenly flipped over and directly blocked the golden needles that were about to fly out. Damn it! This time, Han Yunxi directly cursed. The intoxicating scene by the window had already disappeared. Jun Xie and Long Fei Yi had both left the carriage and gone off to fight. At this moment, Han Yunxi wanted to turn Murong Wanru into a hedgehog. But Murong Wanru was sprawled on one side, unmoving, as if she'd fainted away. All right, all 5 super strong anesthetic needles had landed on her body. If she hadn't fainted, Han Yunxi would be crying. With Murong Wanru gone, Han Yunxi pushed Grand Concubine Yi to one side. Grand Concubine Yi had long fainted from fright and was now lying next to Murong Wanru. Han Yunxi glanced at Murong Wanru with hesitation in her eyes, but she quickly looked away. Hearing the fierce fighting outside, Han Yunxi carefully poked her head out of the carriage window. As expected, the people outside had long turned into a mass of slaughter. Han Yunxi still had assassination weapons in her hands, so she had to help out a bit. But in front of her was a sea of black-robed experts fighting. Besides Chu Shifeng, Han Yunxi couldn't tell who was on her side and who was her enemy. Outside of them, Long Fei Yi and Jun Xie were fighting in the air. Thus, Han Yunxi's target was once again Jun Xie. Jun Xie must have used poison, because Long Fei Yi was clearly dodging. Otherwise, his style would have been fast, accurate, and ruthless. Long Fei Yi kept trying to pull away, but Jun Xie refused to let go. Judging from the current situation, the two of them were evenly matched. If this stalemate continued, Long Fei Yi would be the one to suffer. After all, Jun Xie's poison skills had the upper hand. A single misstep and Long Fei Yi would be finished. Damned poison skills. Han Yunqi watched carefully as she silently analyzed the situation. For a trash like her to be able to analyze things to this extent, she considered herself pretty good. If she had the pear blossom rain needles in her hands, she would have attacked Jun Xie without hesitation. But she had the pear blossom teardrop rain needles in her hands, which was 3 times weaker than the pear blossom rain needles. She had to find the best position for herself. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, she shrunk her head and bent her waist. Like a little mouse, she quietly crawled out of the carriage window and rolled onto the ground to pretend to be a corpse. After making sure that no one had noticed her, she then started to crawl forward. She crawled and stopped for a while to observe her surroundings. Although Long Fei Yi and Jun Xie were fiercely competing, their minds were always on the carriage. From the moment Han Yunqi's head popped out, they knew what was going on. Long Fei Yi's cold gaze caught a glimpse of Han Yunqi crawling on the ground. He completely couldn't understand what this woman was trying to do. Was she trying to escape? Didn't she know that it was safer to obediently stay in the carriage? Jun Xie's sexy and devilish lips curled up in a mischievous smile. He was also very puzzled as to what this woman was trying to do. Suddenly, Long Fei Yi turned his body sideways and swung his sword horizontally. Jun Xie immediately retreated. Long Fei Yi took the opportunity to escape and flew towards Han Yunqi. With this woman by his side, he didn't need to fear Jun Xie's poison. Jun Xie immediately saw through Long Fei Yi's intentions and followed closely behind. He had originally kidnapped Han Yunqi out of curiosity and because he cherished her talent. But now, there was another reason to kidnap Han Yunqi. He absolutely couldn't allow Long Fei Yi to have a poison expert who was on par with him by his side. Long Fei Yi and Jun Xie's speed was indescribably fast. Flying over was not a matter of minutes, but a matter of seconds. At this moment, Han Yunqi had her head lowered as she curled up together. She was hiding as she refilled Pear Blossom Teardrop Rain's gold needles. How would she know that they were already close to her? As soon as she raised her head, she was immediately startled. She saw the 2 people flying towards her, one in front and one behind. Suddenly, Jun Xie, who was slightly behind, threw out a hidden poison dart. When the poison dart flew out, she could see the white powder that it carried. Poison. Poisonous bee pollen. Han Yunqi shouted. She was a professional poison doctor and not a detoxification system operator. Without the assistance of the detoxification system, she could still distinguish a lot of poisons. In the face of this kind of poison, Long Fei Yi had no choice but to dodge. This move was also what Jun Xie often used to force Long Fei Yi away. Long Fei Yi glared at Han Yunqi in displeasure and turned around to dodge. Jun Xie's lips curled into a disdainful sneer as he rushed towards Han Yunqi. Although Long Fei Yi dodged, he immediately raised his sword and fiercely slashed out a sword ray. Jun Xie dodged to the side and approached again. Long Fei Yi's sword chi came to block again. Long Fei Yi swung his sword faster and faster. Jun Xie was unknowingly at a disadvantage and had no choice but to concentrate on dealing with him. As a result, the 2 of them were locked in a fierce battle by Han Yunqi's side. Han Yunqi didn't know why Long Fei Yi was glaring at her. She lay on the ground and looked up. Her small mouth gradually revealed a smug smile. At such a close distance, the opportunity had come again. She quietly turned around and lay on her back. She narrowed her eyes and aimed. Just like this, without Long Fei Yi and Jun Xie noticing, she lightly touched her wrist. In an instant, the newly installed 39 poison golden needles in pear blossom teardrop rain shot out like a rain of needles towards Jun Yixia. Jun Yixia was wholeheartedly focused on fighting Long Fei Yi. How could he be on guard against Han Yunqi? He knew that Han Yunqi's poison skills were very powerful. However, he also knew that Han Yunqi's poison skills were trash. Needles after needles entered his body without warning. A few of them even flew past his face. Jun Yixia was stunned. He never expected Han Yunqi to be able to shoot out needles with such speed and strength. While he was still stunned, Long Fei Ye's sword-on swept towards him mercilessly, aiming for his waist. With the needles in his body and Long Fei's fatal blow, Jun Yixia was sent flying backwards into a large tree and quickly fell to the ground. The loud crash attracted the attention of all the black-robed experts. Seeing their master injured, all of them backed away to protect Jun Yixia. They could vaguely see that Jun Yixia had already crawled to his feet and turned to flee. Chu Shifeng immediately led the black-robed guards in pursuit. Long Fei Ye's lips curved into a mocking smile as he raised his sword to chase after them. But it was then that Han Yunqi grabbed his hand. "What are you doing?" Long Fei Yi asked coldly. "Don't chase." Han Yunqi was very serious. She'd hesitated before, but there was no time to hesitate now. "Let go." Long Fei Yi didn't even ask for a reason, but viciously shook off Han Yunqi's hand. He couldn't lose this chance. He'd been waiting for Jun Yixia for a long time, so he couldn't let him escape this time. But Han Yunqi ran in front of him. "I have something very important to discuss with you. I have to say it now." For the first time, Long Fei Yi felt that Han Yunqi was no different from any other woman. She was unreasonable and only made trouble. Cold, he glared at her before turning to leave. Han Yunqi couldn't stop him, so she grew anxious and blurted out, "Do you know that Murong Wanru is Grand Concubine Yi's biological daughter? You're an adopted child." At these words, Long Fei Yi abruptly stopped and spun around to look at Han Yunqi. In a flash, his eyes flashed with frightening killing intent. This woman, how did she know about this secret? Seeing Long Fei Ye's reaction, Han Yunqi knew she'd successfully stopped him. She didn't notice the killing intent in Long Fei Ye's eyes as she hastily explained, "They were in the carriage. Murong Wanru wanted to kill Grand Concubine Yi to frame me. Grand Concubine Yi said it herself. I only heard it by accident. Just then, I accidentally injured Murong Wanru. It was anesthetic poison. If we don't treat the poison in time, she'll never wake up again. I'll leave it to you to decide." Murong Wanru wasn't a kind person. If she knew she wasn't an adopted daughter, but a true princess, would the Duke of Qin's estate have any more peaceful days? If the secret was exposed, the consequences would be unthinkable. Chapter 209. Han Yunqi was very anxious. Actually, she'd been hesitating in the carriage. In terms of medical ethics, she had to save Murong Wanru, especially since she'd accidentally injured her. After all, the 5 doses of anesthetic were enough to keep Murong Wanru unconscious for the rest of her life and turn her into a vegetable. There wasn't much time left. But she also knew that a vegetable was the best way to keep her mouth shut. She knew she shouldn't think like that, but whether it was her emotions or her reason, she was convinced that Murong Wanru's fate today was all her own. She tried to frame her again and again, but she'd even tried to kill Grand Concubine Yi to frame her. How could she bear such a thing? Alright, things were too complicated. She and Murong Wanru's personal grudges should be put aside for now. She left the choice to Long Fei Yi. The secret of one's birth was more frightening than anything else. Hearing Han Yunqi's explanation, Long Fei Ye's killing intent didn't recede, but grew stronger. Although he'd given the perplexing butterfly illusion to this woman, that didn't mean she could know so much. He wasn't Grand Concubine Yi's son, nor did he have Tianning's imperial bloodline. Grand Concubine Yi thought she'd hidden it well, but he'd found out when the Tang clan came knocking 10 years ago. At most, it'll take the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. After that, no one will be able to save her. Han Yunqi was very serious. By this time, the guards and servants had already gone over to rescue her. Seeing this, Long Fei didn't say a word, but walked over as well. Looking at his back, Han Yunqi still didn't sense anything amiss. She only assumed that he was shocked as well. After all, even the coldest and most emotionless person would feel a bit of emotion if they suddenly found out one day that they weren't their parents' flesh and blood. Han Yunqi hastened to catch up. Long Fei Yi dismissed all the guards and servants before personally straightening the carriage. He lifted the curtains and saw Murong Wanru and Grand Concubine Yi still unconscious together, their faces and bodies covered in wounds. Han Yunqi stood at the side and did not make a sound. Time passed slowly. Everything happened too suddenly. Her mind was still in a mess. Looking at the man's cold black eyes, she could not guess what he meant. Suddenly, Long Fei Yi said faintly, "Get in. Get in the car." Had he decided to save her? It had to be said that Han Yunqi was a little surprised. With this guy's temperament, she believed that he would choose to silence her. If he saved her, things would be very troublesome later. But looking at it from another angle, if Grand Concubine Yi hadn't adopted him, he wouldn't have the power and status he had today. Murong Wanru was Grand Concubine Yi's daughter, so he couldn't bite the hand that fed him. "Get in the car." Suddenly, Long Fei Yi ordered coldly. Han Yunqi came back to her senses and quickly got into the car. She thought too much. But soon, Han Yunqi realized that she wasn't overthinking things. In fact, she was overthinking things. After she got in, Long Fei Yi got in as well. Without a word, he drove the car away at a speed comparable to an arrow released from a bow. Han Yunqi held onto the door sill to keep herself from falling. She looked at Long Fei Yi's cold and resolute profile, her heart pounding. What did this man want to do? Take things too hard and go on a rampage? There wasn't much time left. She couldn't let him go on like this. He had to make a decision. Han Yunqi gathered her courage and reached out to grab Long Fei Yi's hand on the reins. "Long Fei Yi, calm down, won't you? I know it's hard for you to accept this fact, but you should be cold first." Before she could finish, Long Fei Yi suddenly pulled on the reins to stop the carriage. Han Yunqi almost fell out of the carriage, but Long Fei Yi reached out to stop her. She turned her head just as Long Fei Yi happened to look at her. Their eyes met before Han Yunqi finally saw the cold, emotionless killing intent in Long Fei Yi's eyes. Her heart skipped a beat as Han Yunqi grew alarmed. She unconsciously backed away until she fell back into the carriage. This guy, could it be? Long Fei Yi lifted the carriage curtains and swept his icy gaze over the unconscious Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru before resting on Han Yunqi's face. Han Yunqi couldn't help but shiver as she suddenly realized what Long Fei Yi meant. Who was this cold, emotionless man? He was the icy Duke of Long Fei Yi, the man with the power to control life and death. How could he allow anyone to know the secret of his birth? What other choice did he have? What was she trying to figure out? Now that such a terrifying secret had been exposed, he'd definitely silence them. Not only would he silence Murong Wanru, but he would silence her as well. Heavens, had her brain short-circuited? How could she be so stupid and naive? Her own life was in danger, but she still talked about medical ethics with a slut like Murong Wanru. She even considered so much for a terrifying man like Long Fei Yi. She should have turned Murong Wanru into a vegetable to threaten Grand Concubine Yi and pretended she hadn't seen or heard a thing. She could hide the truth from Long Fei Yi for the rest of her life. Han Yunqi discovered that she'd been shamefully stupid. Under Long Fei Ye's merciless gaze, she kept backing away until she was leaning against Grand Concubine Yi. Has the time passed? Long Fei Yi suddenly spoke up. His voice was soft, but it made one's hair stand on end. Han Yunqi swallowed and hastened to reply. It's past. No one can save her. She'll never wake up again in this lifetime. She'll only slowly die of old age. Your Highness can set your heart at ease. Long Fei Yi nodded and asked, then what about you? Qinxia will definitely keep her mouth shut and won't tell anyone. Your Highness gave Qinxia assassination weapons with the intention of training Qinxia. Qinxia definitely won't disappoint your Highness. Qinxia is willing to go through water and tread on fire for your Highness without hesitation. Han Yunqi didn't stop for a single breath. She spoke until she was almost out of breath. She looked at Long Fei Yi, her eyes as pure as a newborn. Even when she'd sworn an oath to study medicine, she'd never been so earnest and sincere. But Long Fei Ye's gaze was as cold as ever as he asked, why should your lordship believe you? Because Qinxia and your Highness are husband and wife. We're on the same boat. The Han family has already fallen, so Qinxia relies on your Highness. Your Highness's safety and honor are Qinxia's safety and honor. If your Highness lives, Qinxia lives. If your Highness dies, Qinxia dies. Qinxia has no reason to betray your Highness. Han Yunqi explained hastily. Even if you die, you still can't betray your lordship. Long Fei Yi was expressionless. This wasn't a rhetorical question, but an ironclad fact. Han Yunqi wasn't sure why, but her heart suddenly clenched even though she was clearly afraid. An indescribable sourness rose up, making her feel more uncomfortable than afraid. Han Yunqi didn't speak, but stared silently at Long Fei Yi. Her eyes were clear and bright. It was rare for her to be so close to him for such a long time. The more she looked at him, the stranger she felt. His eyes were deep and cold, so deep that she couldn't see the bottom of them or his heart. The coldness that seeped into his bones was something he was born with, but this coldness was something he'd nurtured through the struggles of the imperial clan and the dangers of the Jianghu. Long Fei Yi, do you really want to kill me? As it turns out, our relationship over the past year has really been nothing more than an exchange of conditions. We can't even be considered friends. If Tang Li or Chu Shifeng saw this scene, they'd definitely be surprised. With Long Fei Ye's personality, how could he waste so much words? Besides Grand Concubine Yi, he'd kill anyone who knew of his origins without mercy. He should have stabbed him long ago. He even gave Han Yunqi a chance to speak. Seeing Han Yunqi fall silent, Long Fei Ye's eyes flashed with displeasure. Wasn't this damned woman always so eloquent? He'd like to see how much skill she had to convince him. How could she give up so easily? Was she tired of living? His sword suddenly drew closer until it was right in front of Han Yunqi. Answer your lordship's question, he demanded coldly. Han Yunqi woke up with a start. She didn't want to die. As a doctor, she'd hold on to even the slightest bit of hope when it came to saving lives. Now that it was time to save herself, she'd work hard to create hope even if there was none. Even though Long Fei Yi was right in front of her, Han Yunqi still raised her chin bravely. Your Highness, if I die, who'll help you deal with Jun Yixie? He's an expert in poisons. I'm certain that there aren't more than 3 people in Cloud Realm Continent who can compete with him in poisons. I'm one of them. In fact, my poison skills might even be superior to his. Han Yunqi had no idea how beautiful she looked right now, brimming with confidence. Also, since your highness gave me the perplexing butterfly illusion, you must trust my poison skills. I'll do my best to help your highness uncover the secrets of this poison. Moreover. Speaking up to here, Han Yunshi paused and lightly pushed aside Long Fei's sword. She gave a faint smile that was enough to cause the downfall of cities and countries. Moreover, I dare to guarantee that if your highness kills me, you yourself won't live for long. As soon as she finished speaking, she took out a portion of poison. If he dared to kill her, then she'd poison him. Although it wouldn't be faster than his sword, it was at least on par. Long Fei narrowed his eyes and dodged out of the way to get off the carriage. Seeing this, Han Yunshi's smile grew even more brilliant, but only she knew the bitterness hidden in her heart. Long Fei's eyes flashed with satisfaction, but it quickly disappeared. Han Yunshi, you had plenty of chances to poison me. Why didn't you do it? When he'd drawn close, she could have poisoned him without a sound. Although he didn't want to admit it, he'd forgotten to take precautions against this poisonous woman again. But this woman had only shown him the poison at the very end without actually doing anything. Qinxia already said that Qinxia and your highness are on the same boat. As she spoke, she changed her mind and teased, no, your highness is Qinxia's boat. The water's so big, Qinxia can't cut off her own path to survival, can she? In Tianning's boundless seas, he was her boat. Long Fei mulled over her words with interest. Although he didn't express his stance, he still sheathed his sword in the end. Seeing this, Han Yunshi finally let out a sigh of relief. She was right, she thought. In front of this man, she had to have some value. Long Fei walked over and casually tossed the sword to her. Han Yunshi hastily caught it. So heavy. What's the meaning of this? He wanted to kill me just a moment ago, but now he's tossing the sword to me as if nothing has happened. He sat in the carriage and glanced at the two people inside. We'll talk when we get back. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.